The story begins, as all true mysteries do, with a whisper. Not a shout, not a proclamation, but a murmur that slips through candlelit rooms and flickers behind locked study doors. It was the early 1600s, a century trembling on the edge of revelation and ruin. Europe was bleeding, its faith torn apart by Reformation and war, its scholars hunted, its kings obsessed with power and gold. The plague moved like a shadow across the continent, reminding every soul that death was closer than breath itself. And then, from nowhere, came a voice, anonymous, defiant, promising a new dawn. It began with a single pamphlet, written in Latin and whispered from scholar to scholar. It bore no author's name, no origin, only a strange title, Fama Fraternitatis R.C. The fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. It claimed that somewhere, hidden from the world, there existed an invisible brotherhood of enlightened men, a fraternity of learned souls who possessed secrets of medicine, of science, of divine truth itself. They spoke of the Reformation not of religion or government, but of humanity, a total transformation of the world. No one had ever heard of them before. No one could find them afterward. Yet their words spread like wildfire through the courts of Europe. The learned and the lost, the alchemists and theologians, the princes and paupers, all wanted to know, who were the Rosicrucians? The pamphlet told the story of a mysterious founder, Father C. A man born in the East who had traveled the world, studied in Arabia and Egypt, and gathered the ancient wisdom of the ages. When he returned to Europe, he founded a secret brotherhood dedicated to spreading enlightenment, hidden from the corrupt eyes of the powerful. They healed the sick without reward. They carried no gold, no weapons, no names. They possessed knowledge that bridged heaven and earth, and yet they sought nothing but to guide mankind quietly toward truth. In the trembling candlelight of monasteries and universities, men read these words and felt something stir in their souls. Could it be true? Could there really exist a hidden order, untouched by greed or war, guarding ancient wisdom in secret vaults? For those who had watched religion fracture and kings slaughter one another in the name of God, the idea felt like salvation. But for others, it was blasphemy. Church authorities condemned the text as heresy. The Inquisition began whispering of sorcerers, heretics, devil's philosophers. The Fama claimed to know the secrets of life and death, of transmutation, of hidden energies, of the soul's rebirth. To the fearful, it was witchcraft. To the curious, revelation. And still, no one knew who had written it. Soon, more writings followed, Confessio Fraternitatis, the Confession of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, and later the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Together, they wove an even greater myth, one of hidden temples, celestial marriages, and divine light disguised in allegory. But to read them was to enter a labyrinth. Each sentence seemed encoded with symbols, layers of meaning that ordinary men could not decipher. Printers in Strasbourg, Frankfurt, and Paris reissued them in secret. Students passed copies beneath their robes. In taverns and universities, whispers grew louder. Have you met a Rosicrucian? Do they walk among us? Could your neighbor be one of them? For some, it became an obsession. Letters poured in to printing houses, begging for contact. Men swore oaths of loyalty to a brotherhood they could not prove existed. Others, overcome with jealousy or fear, denounced the invisible order as satanic. And in the middle of it all, an idea took root, that behind the chaos of the world, a hidden hand was at work. A hand not of kings or priests, but of philosophers, guiding humanity from the shadows towards something greater. The idea was intoxicating and dangerous. Imagine Europe at that time. The 30 Years' War brewing, the Catholic Church tightening its grip, Protestant princes arming for holy battle. Knowledge itself was treason. Yet here came a message that claimed the divine could be known directly, not through church or crown, but through illumination. It promised a universal reformation, not imposed by sword or sermon, but by awakening. Such a promise frightened those who ruled by ignorance. In smoky chambers, inquisitors plotted. In dim laboratories, alchemists nodded knowingly. The Fama spoke of healing, of transmutation, of hidden light, and many believed the Rosicrucians had unlocked the Philosopher's Stone, that mythical key to eternal life and boundless wisdom. Others suspected they were nothing but a cruel joke, a hoax meant to embarrass scholars and expose their vanity. But whether real or imagined, one thing was certain: the idea could not be unspoken. By 1616, the name Rosicrucian had become legend. Secret symbols began appearing carved into church doors and market stalls. A rose blooming from a cross. To some, it was a message of hope, to others, a warning. Those who claimed to know the brotherhood's secrets were hunted or hailed as prophets. And yet, no one ever found them. No convent, no castle, no monastery. No man ever stepped forward to say, "I am one of them." Not a single initiate revealed himself to the public eye. Perhaps that was the greatest riddle of all, that a movement without a face, without a name, could ignite the imagination of an entire civilization. To the desperate and the devout, the Rosicrucians were proof that purity still existed in a corrupted world. To skeptics, they were fantasy, a myth built from alchemical metaphors and the fevered dreams of men who read too many books in candlelight. But between those two extremes, something extraordinary happened. Europe began to dream again, the dream of enlightenment, of transformation, of the possibility that human beings could rise above superstition and fear and rediscover the divine spark within themselves. For the next century, the legend of the Rosy Cross would ripple outward into philosophy, into science, into secret societies that would shape the modern age. But in this first moment, in that fragile silence after the Fama appeared, what existed was only a question. Who were they? And why had they chosen to speak now, when the world seemed least ready to hear? Some said they were angels. Others said heretics. A few whispered that they were the remnants of something far older, an invisible order that had guided humanity since the dawn of civilization, emerging only when the world was about to lose its light. Whatever the truth, one thing was undeniable. After the Rosicrucians, Europe would never look at knowledge or faith or the human soul the same way again. The whisper had become a storm, and yet, in all the noise, no one had ever seen them. The world into which the Rosicrucian whisper first drifted was one trembling between faith and fire. Europe at the dawn of the 17th century was a continent in crisis, a place of smoke and sermons, superstition and science, each warring for the soul of mankind. The air smelled of damp parchment and burning heretics. The printing press had unleashed ideas faster than kings or priests could contain them, and the world that had once seemed divinely ordered now felt like a crumbling cathedral. In Germany, the ground was cracking beneath the weight of conflicting truths. The Reformation had shattered Christendom into shards. Lutheran towns faced Catholic armies across narrow rivers. Every church bell seemed to toll for a different god. In the markets, apothecaries sold potions made from lead and prayers, while in the universities, new thinkers whispered the forbidden name of Copernicus, the man who had dared to say that the earth itself moved. The old certainties were dissolving. People prayed to saints at dawn and consulted astrologers at night. It was an age of shadows, an age where knowledge was both salvation and sin. The plague swept through cities like a punishment from heaven, leaving streets silent and doorways marked with black crosses. Entire families vanished in a night. Physicians turned to alchemy for cures. Priests turned to exorcisms. Philosophers turned inward, searching for the order beneath chaos. Everywhere, humanity groped for light, and the more it sought, the deeper the darkness seemed to grow. The nobles built palaces to mirror heaven, while peasants barely survived the winters. The Inquisition's agents still hunted for sorcerers and heretics, dragging men and women from their homes for possessing books they could not read. Scholars, fearing for their lives, disguised their discoveries in symbols. A triangle here, a serpent biting its tail there. The language of secrecy became the only way to speak truth. And yet, for all the fear, there was wonder too. Telescopes turned toward the stars. Laboratories flickered with new fires. The dream of the alchemists, to turn base matter into gold, or perhaps ignorance into understanding, was alive in every hidden workshop. The age of reason was struggling to be born, but its midwives worked in the dark. It was in this twilight world that the Rosicrucian Manifestos appeared, as if answering a question the age itself had asked. Their words offered something neither church nor state could provide: hope, the belief that knowledge could redeem humanity, that divine truth could live not in heaven, but within the human mind. To understand how powerful that message was, one must imagine the silence before it. Picture a scholar in a candlelit study in Wittenberg or Prague. The windows are shuttered, the air thick with the scent of wax and ink. He has spent a lifetime chasing fragments of wisdom through forbidden texts, Hermetic treatises, Hebrew mysticism, Greek philosophy. All of it fractured, incomplete. And then, one night, a stranger's pamphlet lands on his desk. It speaks of a brotherhood devoted to healing, enlightenment, and the secret unity of all religions and sciences. It tells him that the world can be transformed not through domination, but through understanding. To that man, the Rosicrucian call must have sounded like a trumpet from heaven. For centuries, the powerful had claimed that revelation belonged only to them, to popes, to princes, to prophets. The Rosicrucian vision shattered that illusion. It said that revelation could belong to anyone brave enough to seek it, that the divine spark was not chained to altars or crowns, but hidden within every human soul, waiting to be kindled. The world was not ready. The same forces that longed for salvation also feared it. The idea of invisible philosophers working beyond the reach of church and empire threatened every structure of power. And yet the notion spread, quietly but irresistibly, because people needed to believe that someone, somewhere, still sought truth for its own sake. While armies gathered and kingdoms burned, thinkers began to imagine a secret Europe beneath the visible one. A network of enlightened minds united by knowledge rather than nation, by compassion rather than creed. The Rosicrucian legend gave shape to that invisible Europe. It became the dream of what civilization might be, if men could rise above their divisions and see the world as one great pattern. Outside, winter gripped the land. Inside the minds of the few who dared to dream, spring was beginning. The pamphlets themselves were small things. Cheap, poorly printed, scattered like seeds by anonymous hands. Yet the soil they fell upon was fertile. In university halls and candlelit inns, young students debated their meaning. Some believed the brotherhood was real, hidden in the East. Others thought it a divine allegory. But all agreed on one thing: whoever wrote those words understood something profound about the human hunger for purpose. At night, rumors spread faster than the plague. In taverns, merchants claimed to have glimpsed men in long robes marked with a rose and cross. In noble courts, astrologers whispered that the brotherhood had predicted the fall of empires. In monasteries, monks prayed that the mysterious order would end the wars tearing Christendom apart. Everywhere, the idea took root, that beyond the cruelty of men, there existed a plan, a secret harmony waiting to be revealed. The Rosicrucian promise arrived at the perfect moment, when people had lost faith in both heaven and earth. It bridged the gap between the two. For the theologian, it offered divine renewal. For the scientist, a hidden order in the cosmos. For the common man, the dream that knowledge could free him from despair. It was not just a philosophy, it was a lifeline. The anonymous authors had understood something about the human heart. When the world grows too dark, people will invent light, and sometimes that invention becomes real. Whether the Rosicrucians existed or not was almost irrelevant. Their myth became a vessel for hope, and in an age starving for meaning, hope was the rarest alchemy of all. In that age of shadows, the borders between science and sorcery, faith and knowledge, were still porous. Alchemists spoke of spirits within metals. Theologians debated whether angels governed the planets. The Rosicrucian texts drew upon both worlds, blending the language of revelation with the precision of natural philosophy. They spoke of medicine, astronomy, and moral renewal in the same breath, as though the soul of man and the laws of the universe were reflections of one another. It was a dangerous idea because it implied that the divine could be studied, that salvation might one day be measurable. But it was also intoxicating because it suggested that the chaos of the world might be understood, and therefore healed. The armies still marched, the plague still spread, and the fires of the stake still burned. But somewhere, In a small study lit by a single candle, a scholar whispered to himself words from the Fama Fraternitatis. Our building, although 100,000 people had seen it from afar, shall forever remain untouched and hidden. A hidden temple, an invisible brotherhood, an age of shadows awaiting dawn. And as the first snow of another bitter winter fell upon Europe, those who read and believed began to look at the world differently. As if behind every tragedy there was a design, behind every secret, a truth waiting to be uncovered. The idea of the Rosicrucians was no longer just a story. It was a mirror held up to a suffering world, reflecting what humanity could become if it dared to remember its forgotten light. The first manifesto arrived like a spark in dry grass, but the second turned that spark into fire. In 1614, the Fama Fraternitatis had whispered of an invisible brotherhood, healers and sages working in secret for the good of humankind. By 1615, its twin appeared, the Confessio Fraternitatis, or the Confession of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. This second text did not merely hint, it declared. Its tone was sharper, more urgent, filled with a sense of divine mission. The Rosicrucians, it said, were servants of God's truth, chosen instruments of a coming transformation that would renew the world. They invited all wise men to join them, but warned the unworthy to turn away. The Confessio claimed that the age of revelation was at hand. The secrets of nature, long hidden, were ready to be unveiled. The world had grown old, it said, corrupted by greed, falsehood, and ignorance. Yet the dawn of a new age was near, a general reformation, guided by those who understood the laws of both heaven and earth. The brotherhood would not rule by sword or crown, but by light, reason, and compassion. These were not the words of rebellion in the ordinary sense. They did not call for kings to fall or churches to burn. Instead, they spoke to something deeper, to the idea that change must begin within the human soul. In a time when Europe was drowning in war and dogma, such words sounded like treason wrapped in poetry. The Confessio appeared in German first, then in Latin, carried across borders by printers and smugglers. Within months, copies reached Prague, London, and Paris. Scholars dissected every line, hunting for clues. Who were these men who claimed to know the hidden order of the universe? Where was their temple? Why had they chosen this moment to speak? Then, in 1616, came the third text, the most mysterious of all, the chimical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, anno 1459. It was no longer a proclamation but an allegory, a dream told in 7 days. The story followed an old man named Christian Rosenkreuz who receives a strange invitation to attend a royal wedding at a distant castle. The journey that follows is part pilgrimage, part initiation, filled with riddles, alchemy, and death disguised as transformation. The chimical wedding reads like a fever dream. Castles float in clouds. Gardens bloom with impossible colors. Angels appear disguised as beggars. Kings and queens dissolve into vapors of gold. At first glance, it seems a fairy tale, but to the initiated, it was a map, a symbolic guide to the alchemical process, the transformation of the soul from lead to light. Each trial Rosenkreuz faced mirrored the alchemist's laboratory. Purification, dissolution, rebirth. It was not a tale about turning metal into gold, but ignorance into wisdom. Readers across Europe were transfixed. Some saw in it a divine revelation, others a heretical parody. The church recoiled. Mystics rejoiced. For the first time, people began to ask not only who the Rosicrucians were, but what they wanted. The text spoke of ancient knowledge preserved through centuries of darkness, guarded by a few faithful keepers. They hinted at secret places, libraries beneath the desert, temples hidden in the east, the graves of old philosophers whose teachings could heal the world if only humanity were ready to receive them. They described the brotherhood as bound by 3 vows: to heal the sick, to wear no distinctive clothing, and to remain hidden for 100 years. And always the same paradox. They claimed to exist everywhere and nowhere. This ambiguity was deliberate. The anonymous authors understood that mystery itself could be a form of power. The moment a truth is hidden, men begin to search for it, and when they search, they awaken. Soon, pamphlets appeared responding to the Rosicrucian manifestos. Some praised the brotherhood and begged for admission. Others accused them of deception, even of witchcraft. Rival philosophers wrote furious denials. Yet beneath the noise, the deeper message resonated: that knowledge and spirituality were not enemies, but two halves of the same divine equation. The Rosicrucian writings seemed to weave together every thread of Western mysticism: Christian symbolism, alchemical transformation, Hermetic wisdom, and the promise of an approaching enlightenment. To a generation weary of war and religious hypocrisy, this synthesis was intoxicating. It offered a new way of being religious without surrendering to dogma, scientific without abandoning faith. But it also raised questions that frighten the powerful. If the divine could be known through reason, what need was there for the authority of church or king? If enlightenment came through personal awakening, what place remained for priests and princes? Some scholars speculated that the Rosicrucian movement was a coded political protest, a cry for reform disguised as mysticism. Others thought it was an elaborate prank by learned men mocking the gullibility of their age. Yet the language of the manifestos was too precise, too layered with sacred imagery, to be a mere joke. Even its detractors admitted that whoever wrote them possessed immense learning. One passage in the Confessio declared, "God hath already sent before certain excellent men, who have broken through darkness and barbarism, and have shown us that nature is not wholly hidden." Those words struck a nerve. In them, readers sensed the pulse of a new worldview, one that would soon blossom into the Enlightenment itself. By now, the myth of Christian Rosenkreuz, the mysterious founder, had taken on a life of its own. Some claimed he was immortal, wandering the world in disguise. Others said he had ascended to heaven but still guided his followers through visions. To the Rosicrucians, he was not a person at all but a symbol, the awakened human spirit, the inner alchemist capable of transmuting ignorance into light. Yet the more scholars searched, the less they found. No monastery records, no letters, no identifiable group called the Rosicrucians existed anywhere. The only evidence of them was the words themselves, words that seemed to appear from the void and vanish just as quickly. In an age obsessed with authority and proof, this invisibility was scandalous. But for many, it was also proof of authenticity. If they are invisible, one admirer wrote, then they must be real, for truth hides itself from the eyes of the proud. Still, not everyone was comforted. Governments began to fear that the Rosicrucian myth might spark uprisings. Theologians warned of a new heresy cloaked in philosophy. Alchemists, already suspect, found themselves questioned by inquisitors. And through it all, the manifestos spread further, carried by curiosity itself. There was something hauntingly prophetic about their tone. The writers seemed to speak from beyond time, warning that humanity stood at the threshold of either illumination or self-destruction. The world, they said, is pregnant with great commotions, yet will bring forth a fair child. To their readers, it sounded as though the universe itself were laboring toward rebirth. That image of the world as a womb of transformation would outlive the pamphlets themselves. It became the central myth of modern esotericism, that all of history is a process of alchemy, refining the human spirit toward perfection. The Rosicrucians, whether real or imagined, gave voice to that cosmic drama. By the time authorities began to investigate, the authors had vanished. No names, no faces, not even the printers could identify who had commissioned the work. The Brotherhood had announced its existence, delivered its message, and disappeared back into silence. But they had changed something irrevocably. For the first time, the boundaries between science, magic, and faith had blurred into a single vision. A vision of unity, of a cosmos alive with intelligence, waiting to be understood by the brave. The manifestos left Europe with more questions than answers, yet the questions were themselves transformative. What if knowledge could be sacred? What if enlightenment was not the privilege of a few, but the destiny of all? The words of the Rosicrucians echoed like distant bells in the minds of those who heard them. And as the old order continued to crumble, a new faith began to rise, not in dogma, but in discovery. The invisible brotherhood had spoken. Now the world would spend centuries trying to listen. The search began almost immediately. It started in whispers, letters sent between scholars, rumors exchanged in taverns, coded notes slipped beneath church doors, but soon it became an obsession that spread like fever. The world had read the Rosicrucian Manifestos, and now it wanted proof. Who were these mysterious brothers who claimed to heal the sick, to hold the secrets of creation, and yet refused to show their faces? Were they saints, heretics, or something in between? From the courts of Germany to the universities of France, men who had once debated Aristotle and Scripture now debated a ghost. A few believed the Rosicrucians were real and living among them, hidden behind ordinary names. Others thought they were spirits or angels. Some insisted they had already infiltrated Europe's royal courts, whispering into the ears of kings. And a handful of skeptics laughed, saying the brotherhood was nothing but the fantasy of dreamers too long alone with their books. But disbelief could not kill fascination. The more the Rosicrucians hid, the more people needed to find them. By 1617, letters began arriving at print shops addressed simply to the most worshipful brothers of the Rosy Cross. They came from every corner of Europe, from noblemen, monks, physicians, and even impoverished students. "I seek to serve the light," one letter pleaded. "Reveal yourselves, that I might learn the wisdom of the ages." Another begged to be healed of illness by the virtue of your unseen art. Some signed their names with strange symbols, believing the secret fraternity would recognize them. None received a reply. In Paris, an astrologer claimed he had met two members of the Brotherhood disguised as merchants. In Prague, a rumor spread that the Rosicrucians had built a secret temple beneath the city's old Jewish quarter. In London, printers boasted that a mysterious gentleman had paid them handsomely to import Rosicrucian texts. Each story added another layer to the myth, and each contradiction only deepened the mystery. As curiosity turned to mania, impostors began to appear. Charlatans claimed to be initiate brothers, offering to sell membership or reveal hidden truths for a price. One man in Venice advertised that he could summon the invisible masters with incense and prayer. Another claimed to possess the original letters of Christian Rosenkreuz, bound in red leather. The authorities grew nervous. If an invisible order could inspire such devotion, perhaps it could also incite rebellion. In some cities, the word Rosicrucian was enough to get one arrested. In others, it became a mark of pride, worn like a badge by those who believed themselves enlightened. Secret discussion circles formed, small gatherings of thinkers, poets, and alchemists who claimed to pursue the Rosicrucian art. Whether any of them had contact with the real brotherhood, if it existed, remained uncertain, but their passion was genuine. They studied medicine, astronomy, and philosophy by candlelight, searching for the same hidden unity described in the Manifestos. In Strasbourg, a rumor spread that the brothers would soon reveal themselves. An anonymous pamphlet claimed that, at the end of 7 years, the order would open its doors to all who were pure of heart. The year came and went. No one appeared. Still, the legend only grew stronger. The Rosicrucians became a mirror in which people saw what they most desired. To the oppressed, they were liberators. To the sick, healers. To the curious, scientists. To the devout, messengers of God. And to the fearful, they were devils cloaked in light. Some scholars began to suspect a deeper purpose. Perhaps the very point of the Manifestos was to awaken Europe, to stir the sleeping mind, to challenge men to imagine a world guided by reason and compassion. If the Brotherhood existed, it was not in flesh and blood, but in the transformation of thought itself. But others were not so philosophical. In 1623, a mysterious event in Paris ignited a new wave of hysteria. One morning, passers-by noticed strange messages painted on the walls of the Latin Quarter. "We, the brothers of the Rosy Cross, do lodge, visible and invisible, in this city. We speak unto men, but no man unto us. Our thoughts are pure joy, and we will show you where to find it." The graffiti appeared overnight. No one saw who wrote it. Within hours, crowds gathered, speculating, arguing, praying. The city buzzed with rumor. Had the Brotherhood finally revealed itself? Were they living among the Parisians, unseen? The authorities, alarmed, launched an investigation. Spies scoured the streets. Priests warned their congregations that the devil was at work. But nothing was found, not a single suspect, not a single clue. The messages vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving only confusion in their wake. Some claimed the inscriptions were the work of a secret Protestant sect mocking the Catholic establishment. Others swore they saw hooded figures disappearing into the night. But one thing was clear: the Rosicrucians had become the most famous invisible organization in the world. Philosophers wrote entire treatises debating their nature. Were they ancient survivors of Egyptian mystery schools? Heirs of the Knights Templar? Alchemists preserving the wisdom of Atlantis? Each theory was more fantastical than the last, yet no one could disprove them. The absence of evidence became proof itself. Even the skeptical began to waver. Descartes, traveling in Germany, was rumored to have sought an audience with the Brotherhood, though he later denied it. Others swore he had been refused because he was not yet ready. The great scientist Robert Fludd was accused of being their English representative, though he claimed only sympathy for their ideals. Wherever intellect flourished, the shadow of the Rosicrucians lingered. The movement's anonymity became its genius. Because no one could find them, anyone could imagine them. They existed precisely where faith and reason met, in the space between visible and invisible, between what could be proven and what could only be felt. They were, in a sense, a myth deliberately designed to teach discernment. The seeker who chased them outwardly found only silence. The one who turned inward began to understand. Yet the human mind resists silence. It demands faces, names, stories. So the legend continued to evolve. Some said the brothers met yearly in the forests of Bohemia under a starlit sky. Others claimed their founder, Christian Rosenkreutz, still slept in a hidden tomb, waiting to awaken when mankind was ready for his wisdom. A few believed that every century, one chosen soul was initiated into their order to keep the light alive. By the mid-1600s, the search had become a cultural phenomenon. Playwrights mocked the craze on stage. Satirists published fake Rosicrucian manifestos. Yet even parody could not destroy the myth. The idea of a hidden brotherhood guiding humanity refused to die. Perhaps it endured because it was more than myth. It was an archetype, the dream that somewhere, behind the cruelty of history, goodness and wisdom still conspired on our behalf. The Rosicrucians represented not merely an organization, but an ideal, that truth could survive in secret until the world was ready to receive it. And so the years passed, the wars raged, the plague returned, the graffiti faded from the walls of Paris, and the letters to the invisible brothers went unanswered. But in countless quiet rooms, men and women still read the manifestos by candlelight, tracing their fingers over the words as if they were prayers. Perhaps, in that moment, they understood the real secret, that the brotherhood was never meant to be found in the streets or the mountains or any temple of stone. It lived only in those who sought it, in the yearning itself. For in every age, the invisible order reappears, not as men cloaked in mystery, but as ideas born in the minds of those who dare to dream. The phantom brotherhood had vanished, or perhaps it had never been there at all. Yet its silence was more eloquent than any sermon, and its absence more powerful than presence. Because the greatest mysteries are not the ones we solve, but the ones that change us while we search. By the time the fever of the Rosicrucian mystery had swept across Europe, a few clear-headed men began to wonder if the secret brotherhood was not hidden in catacombs or cloisters at all, but in plain sight, in the minds of those who had crafted its myth. Somewhere, perhaps in the universities of Tübingen or Heidelberg, someone had written those extraordinary manifestos. Someone had decided to release them to the world. The words had to come from somewhere, the ink from a living hand. The question was, whose hand had shaped the Rosicrucian dream? It was in the scholarly town of Tübingen, nestled along the Neckar River in the south of Germany, that the trail began to form. Here, in the early 1600s, a circle of young thinkers gathered around one of the most brilliant minds of their generation, Tobias Hess. He was a physician, a philosopher, and an ardent believer in the coming of a new age. An age when science and faith would merge, when the wisdom of antiquity would renew the world. Around Hesse were his students and friends, Johann Valentin Andrea, Christoph Besold, and a few others whose names have since faded into the fog of history. They were not revolutionaries with swords, but dreamers with pens. Their world was crumbling around them. Europe was sliding toward the 30 Years' War, a brutal conflict of faith and power that would drown millions. Yet in this grim landscape, these men spoke not of destruction but of renewal. They dreamed of a general reformation of the whole wide world. They studied theology, alchemy, mathematics, and the newly rediscovered works of ancient philosophers. They read the Hermetica, those cryptic texts said to hold the secrets of divine creation. They debated Paracelsus, who had spoken of a hidden wisdom in nature, and the Neoplatonists, who believed that the divine could be known through beauty and proportion. From these sources they wove a vision, a secret brotherhood that could heal the world through knowledge and compassion. In their student rooms, by flickering candlelight, they wrote letters to one another using symbolic language. They dreamed of secret laboratories and hidden archives. They imagined an order of enlightened men who would guide humanity toward peace. It was in this fertile soil that the seeds of the Rosicrucian myth were planted. Among them, one man stood out, Johann Valentin Andrea. He was young, brilliant, restless, and deeply spiritual. Later in life, he would become a respected theologian and reformer, but in his youth, he was a visionary idealist who believed that the divine truth could be clothed in story and symbol. Around 1605, he began writing an allegorical novel titled The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. It told of an old man invited to a mysterious castle where alchemy, spiritual tests, and celestial mysteries intertwine over 7 days. The story was strange, filled with dreamlike imagery. Talking statues, hidden tombs, alchemical transformations, but beneath its symbols lay a message: the soul's journey toward enlightenment. When the Rosicrucian Manifestos appeared, Fama Fraternitatis in 1614, Confessio Fraternitatis in 1615, and The Chemical Wedding in 1616, their style and imagery bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Andrea's world. Though he never publicly claimed authorship, many scholars now believe he either wrote or heavily influenced them. Yet Andrea himself, years later, would refer to the Rosicrucian texts as a ludibrium, a play, a jest, perhaps even a spiritual experiment meant to awaken minds rather than deceive them. If it was a jest, it was the most profound joke in history, one that Europe took deadly seriously. Andrea may have intended it as a kind of social alchemy, a myth designed to transmute human ignorance into curiosity. He understood that in times of despair, humanity needs symbols more than facts. He had given the world a myth of hope disguised as a mystery of power. And yet, the myth escaped his control. It became what all great myths become: self-aware, self-sustaining. Once the idea of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood entered the public imagination, it refused to die. Whether or not Andrea was its author ceased to matter. The myth had taken on a life of its own. But Andrea and his circle were not alone in shaping it. Across the German states, a hidden network of thinkers and mystics was already forming, a current of ideas flowing beneath the visible world. Many were Protestant humanists disillusioned with the corruption of both Rome and the rising political powers. They sought a purer faith, one that united reason and revelation. For them, the Rosicrucian ideal was not a game. It was a blueprint for the future. One figure connected to this current was Michael Meyer, physician to the Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, a man obsessed with alchemy and hidden wisdom. Meyer became one of the first public defenders of the Rosicrucians, publishing works that treated them as real and noble reformers. His writings blurred the line between defense and devotion, helping spread the myth to England and Italy. Whether he had any true connection to the Tübingen circle remains uncertain, but his enthusiasm made the Rosicrucians seem more tangible than ever. Then there was Robert Flood in England, a learned physician and mystic who shared many Rosicrucian ideals. When accused of being one of their agents, he neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, he wrote that true wisdom needs no defense, a statement that only deepened the mystery. Flood's intricate diagrams of the cosmos, the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm, mirrored the spiritual geometry that lay at the heart of the Rosicrucian philosophy. In these figures, Andrea, Hess, Meyer, Flood, we find the human faces behind the myth. Yet none of them ever stood before the world to claim the title Rosicrucian. And perhaps that was the point. The myth demanded anonymity. The moment someone declared themselves a Rosicrucian, they ceased to be one. The brotherhood could exist only in the invisible, as a symbol and aspiration, a mirror held up to human potential. Still, it is easy to see why people believed. The Manifestos spoke with authority, with conviction, with the kind of confidence only those who know speak with. Our building, although 100,000 people had seen it from afar, shall remain untouched by fire for all posterity, the Fama declared. Such sentences felt like revelations. They promised the existence of something eternal, something untouched by the decay of time. In an age of war and plague, that promise was irresistible. And so, the Rosicrucian myth was both a mirror and a mask, the creation of a few minds, yet born of the longing of an entire civilization. The authors may have intended a moral allegory, but Europe read it as prophecy. The brotherhood they described became a collective dream that no author could contain. Andrea, in his later years, seemed to watch the unfolding of this dream with a mix of amusement and sorrow. He devoted himself to real social reform, founding schools and charitable societies. His Christian Republic, a vision of enlightened faith and practical goodness, was, in a sense, the real Rosicrucian fraternity he had imagined. But the world preferred the myth of secret powers and invisible masters. Humanity has always chosen the mystery of the unseen over the discipline of the real. And yet, perhaps Andrea's dream succeeded after all. Because even if the Rosicrucians never existed as an order, their myth forced people to ask dangerous questions about knowledge, about power, about the possibility that enlightenment could exist outside of church or crown. In this sense, the brotherhood did live, not in hidden chambers, but in the minds it awakened. If the Rosicrucian Manifestos were a creation, then they were a creation of genius, a spark that lit the dark corridors of early modern Europe. And in that spark, we glimpse something profound, that sometimes the most powerful truths must first appear in disguise, as myths meant to lead us toward the real. Symbols are the language of the unseen. They are bridges between the physical and the spiritual, between what we can name and what we can only feel. For the Rosicrucians, symbols were not decoration or metaphor, they were living keys. Every emblem, every geometric shape, every color carried meaning, like coded messages written in the fabric of creation itself. To truly understand the Rosicrucian mystery, one had to learn to read this secret alphabet of symbols, the hidden architecture of their world. At the center of that world stood a single emblem, the rose and the cross, two ancient symbols fused into one, the flower of beauty and blood entwined with the instrument of suffering and redemption. It was a union so simple, yet so impossibly deep, that centuries of scholars have wrestled with its meaning. The rose has always been the flower of secrecy and love. In ancient Rome, roses were hung above banquet tables to remind guests that anything spoken there was sub rosa. Under the rose, a vow of silence. To the alchemists, the rose symbolized unfolding consciousness, the soul blooming toward divine perfection. And in Christian mysticism, the rose was the symbol of divine love made flesh, the blood of Christ flowering in the heart of humanity. The cross, by contrast, symbolized the intersection of opposites. Heaven and earth, spirit and matter, the infinite and the finite. It was the sign of both death and transcendence, the burden of the world and the gateway to eternity. To combine these two, the rose and the cross, was to declare that divine beauty and human suffering were not enemies, but partners in transformation. The rose cross was an emblem of the alchemical marriage, the sacred union of opposites that gave birth to illumination. Those who studied the Rosicrucian Manifestos began to see this emblem everywhere. The cross represented the human body, the four elements, the four directions, the world of matter. The rose, placed at its heart, was the soul, pure, fragile, yet capable of eternal renewal. Together they formed a map of the human condition, the body crucified upon the world, the spirit blooming through its pain. But the symbolism went deeper still. The Fama Fraternitatis spoke of a secret tomb, a chamber hidden beneath the earth, discovered by chance 120 years after the death of their founder, Christian Rosicrucians. Inside, everything was perfect, untouched by time. On the altar stood a brass plate engraved with the words, Jesus mihi omnia. Jesus is everything to me. The room was lit by a mysterious sun that never set, and at its center lay the perfectly preserved body of the founder, holding a book that contained all wisdom. To the literal-minded, it was a fantastical story. But to those fluent in the symbolic language of the age, the tomb was not a place at all. It was the human soul. The 7 sides of the vault represented the 7 classical planets, the 7 stages of alchemical transformation. The eternal light symbolized divine consciousness, the illumination that burns within even in the depths of the material world. The sleeping founder was the divine spark in man, buried beneath layers of ignorance and time, waiting to be awakened. The tomb's discovery, then, was not an archaeological event but a spiritual one, the moment of inner revelation when the seeker rediscovers the divine within. This imagery echoes the old alchemical texts, where the philosopher's stone, the goal of every alchemist, is often found in the most unexpected place, the heart of the seeker himself. To open the tomb of Rosicrucians was to open the heart, to resurrect the inner Christ, to awaken the hidden sun within the self. And what of the number 7, the number that reappears throughout the Manifestos? There are 7 walls to the tomb, 7 days in the chemical wedding, 7 steps to spiritual perfection. In Rosicrucian cosmology, 7 was the number of process and completion, the rhythm by which the universe itself breathed. It represented the harmonization of the 4 elements of matter with the 3 principles of spirit, body, soul, and divinity intertwined. To pass through the 7 stages was to achieve wholeness. Even the architectural description of the tomb, round above, square below, concealed a profound truth. It symbolized the union of heaven, the circle, perfect and infinite, and earth, the square, stable and material. This was the same sacred geometry found in cathedrals, pyramids, and mandalas, the eternal striving of spirit to perfect form. In the Rosicrucian vision, the entire cosmos was such a structure, a divine temple hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized by awakened eyes. Alchemy, too, ran through every page of the Manifestos, but not the crude chemistry of transmuting lead into gold, rather the transformation of the soul itself. Lead was ignorance, the heavy metal of the unrefined spirit. Gold was enlightenment, the radiant perfection of the purified self. Every symbol of fire, water, dissolution, and rebirth in their texts referred not to furnaces or crucibles, but to inner experience, the burning away of falsehood, the dissolving of the ego, the reconstitution of the true self in divine harmony. The Rosicrucian emblem thus became a meditation, a symbolic equation in which suffering became beauty, death became life, and matter became spirit. To wear the symbol was not merely to claim membership in a secret order, but to declare one's commitment to an inner transformation. There was another symbol often overlooked, the mysterious figure of Christian Rosicrucians himself. His very name was a symbol, Christian for faith, Rosicrucians for the rose and cross, the 2 halves of the great work. Whether he ever existed as a real person is irrelevant. His name was an alchemical formula. It expressed the transformation of man through the marriage of love, the rose, and sacrifice, the cross. He was not a founder but an archetype, the divine initiate sleeping within every human being. Even the timing of his supposed life, born in 1378, dead at age 106, his tomb discovered 120 years later, was numerically charged. These numbers echo the numerology of spiritual cycles, the ages of initiation, death, and resurrection. The Rosicrucians understood time itself as symbolic. History, to them, was a grand alchemical process, the transformation of civilization through the fire of suffering toward a golden age of enlightenment. To the uninitiated, this might sound like poetry or delusion, but to those living in the chaos of 17th-century Europe, these symbols offered a secret order, a reason hidden beneath catastrophe. The wars, the plagues, the religious divisions, All could be seen as the lead from which the gold of human consciousness would one day emerge. The world, like the alchemist's crucible, was being purified through fire. And so, the Rosicrucian myth became not only a story but a symbolic system, a spiritual architecture built from geometry, number, and allegory. It was designed to awaken the imagination, to train the mind to see beyond surface appearances. Every symbol was a door, and every door opened inward. The rose and cross, the tomb, the numbers, the sacred geometry. All of it formed a language of transformation, whispered through myth and mystery. And in that language, a truth began to emerge, that the greatest alchemy was not found in gold or elixirs, but in the reawakening of the soul. For those who truly understood the Rosicrucian code, the invisible brotherhood was not a secret order hiding in the shadows. It was a state of consciousness, a kingdom of the awakened that existed not in any nation, but within the heart of anyone ready to see. As the 17th century unfolded, Europe became a laboratory of secret ideas. The printing press had shattered the monopoly of knowledge once held by the Church, and the wars of religion had left the continent spiritually exhausted. People longed for new systems of belief, new philosophies that could reconcile faith with reason, the visible with the invisible. Into this fertile confusion, the Rosicrucian myth fell like a spark upon dry wood. Its symbols began to drift, quietly but persistently, into the lodges, societies, and philosophical circles that were shaping the modern world. It began innocently enough. Across Germany, England, and France, groups of scholars and artisans gathered for intellectual fellowship, part social club, part spiritual salon. Some met to discuss the sciences, others to study moral philosophy, architecture, or theology. They called themselves brotherhoods, colleges of the spirit, or simply lodges. Over time, these gatherings absorbed the mystique of the Rosicrucians. Their symbolism, their secrecy, their ideal of hidden enlightenment guiding a chaotic world. The invisible brotherhood had given birth to visible imitations. The first evidence of this influence appeared in England. By the mid-1600s, Rosicrucian themes had woven their way into the intellectual fabric of the age. Men like Robert Fludd, Elias Ashmole, and Thomas Vaughan, scholars, physicians, and alchemists, were openly fascinated by the Rosicrucian writings. Ashmole, the founder of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, was himself a Freemason and collector of esoteric texts. His writings reveal a profound belief in an invisible network of wise men guiding human progress. The world, he wrote, is full of hidden correspondences. The wise learn to see them. Such language was pure Rosicrucianism, the belief that the divine order could be found not by retreating from the world, but by perceiving its secret harmonies. It is no coincidence that early Freemasonry began to take shape in the same intellectual climate. Though the Masons traced their lineage to the builders of Solomon's Temple and the medieval cathedral Masons, the speculative Masons of the 17th century were less concerned with stone than with spirit. Their lodges became laboratories of moral and philosophical alchemy. Inside these lodges, ritual replaced manifesto. Symbols replaced sermons. The compass and square echoed the sacred geometry of the Rosicrucians. The temple represented the inner structure of the soul. Both systems shared the same goal: to construct a perfect human being through discipline, secrecy, and enlightenment. The rose had become a compass, the cross a plumb line, yet the philosophy was unmistakably the same. Meanwhile, on the continent, the Rosicrucian influence seeped into circles of power. In France, members of the court whispered of secret societies that studied natural magic and the mathematics of divinity. In Prague, under Emperor Rudolf II, a kind of mystical renaissance flourished, a gathering of astronomers, alchemists, and philosophers who believed the universe itself was a divine cipher. The emperor's court became a living image of the Rosicrucian dream, a place where art, science, and spirituality fused in pursuit of hidden truth. Even as the wars ravaged Europe, these quiet undercurrents persisted. Out of devastation arose the belief that humanity could rebuild the world through knowledge, a very Rosicrucian idea. The Brotherhood's influence reached the early Enlightenment thinkers who sought to reconcile reason with the divine. For them, the Rosicrucian vision offered a bridge, a way to believe in both God and geometry, revelation, and science. By the 18th century, the Rosicrucian current had become a river flowing beneath Europe's intellectual life. Freemasonry, now spread across the continent, adopted layers of mystical degrees that blended biblical symbolism with alchemical and Rosicrucian themes. The so-called Rosicrucian degrees began to appear in Masonic rites, the Knight of the Rose Croix, the Prince of the Royal Secret, and others. These rituals, rich with symbolism, spoke of spiritual resurrection, the union of opposites, and the pursuit of divine wisdom. The original manifestos may have faded into the past, but their message had found new life within the Masonic temples of Paris, London, and Vienna. Some historians argue that this was the moment the myth fulfilled its purpose. The invisible brotherhood, whether real or not, had accomplished what its manifestos promised. It had inspired a new era of spiritual science. The Enlightenment, though often portrayed as an age of reason opposed to mysticism, was in many ways the Rosicrucian dream realized, a world where curiosity became sacred and knowledge, divine. Yet not everyone saw the light. To some, the spread of secret societies was terrifying. The Church viewed Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism alike as threats to orthodoxy, suspecting them of harboring heretical or even diabolical teachings. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued the first papal bull condemning Freemasonry, calling it a seed of confusion. Behind this fear was not merely theology, but politics. The idea of hidden networks of men bound by secret oaths frightened those who ruled by divine right. The invisible hand of the Rosicrucians, real or imagined, was now accused of manipulating empires. The irony is that the Rosicrucian spirit was never about power. Its original message was personal, internal, transformative. But myths evolve as they travel, and in the shadowed halls of power, transformation easily becomes manipulation. By the time of the Enlightenment, whispers spread of Rosicrucian cabals, influencing revolutions, banking, and scientific societies. Voltaire mocked them as fantasists. Others accused them of controlling the world. The invisible masters had become, in the public mind, invisible rulers. And still, their symbolism endured. Across Europe, cathedrals, gardens, and even musical compositions began to reflect Rosicrucian themes. Composers like Jean-Philippe Rameau and later Erik Satie would draw on mystical geometry and hidden harmonies. In architecture, the rose and cross appeared carved into facades, hidden among the vines of ornamented stone. The myth had become culture. In England, the philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon had already sown similar ideas decades earlier in his New Atlantis, a utopian vision of a secret college of wise men guiding humanity through knowledge. Though he never mentioned the Rosicrucians by name, later generations saw in his vision a clear reflection of them. The House of Solomon, he called it, a temple of learning where science and faith coexisted. To many, Bacon was the intellectual ancestor of the Rosicrucian project, or perhaps even one of its hidden authors. Whether Bacon knew of the manifestos or not, his ideas harmonized perfectly with theirs. Both called for a general reformation of the world through enlightened knowledge. Both placed faith in a hidden order of wisdom behind the surface of chaos. The Enlightenment's faith in progress, reason, and the perfectibility of man owes something, however faintly, to this Rosicrucian dream. And so, the invisible fraternity that may never have existed shaped the visible institutions that built the modern world. Through the language of symbols, ritual, and secrecy, the Rosicrucian ideal seeped into the bloodstream of civilization, influencing not only Masons and mystics but scientists, artists, and philosophers. The irony is exquisite. A myth born in secrecy gave birth to an age of illumination. The brotherhood that claimed invisibility left its fingerprints on everything. This hidden light became the fire of modernity. Yet even as its ideas spread, the mystery deepened. Were the Freemasons merely inspired by Rosicrucianism, or were they its deliberate inheritors, the visible branch of an invisible root? Some hinted that the earliest Masonic charters came directly from Rosicrucian archives. Others believed the Rosicrucians still guided their progress from behind the veil, ensuring that the torch of wisdom passed unbroken through the centuries. The line between history and legend blurred until it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. The Rosicrucians had succeeded in their ultimate alchemy, transforming myth into memory, symbol into structure, invisibility into influence. And in this transformation lay a paradox worthy of their art. The more their symbols were revealed, the more the mystery deepened. For what is illumination without shadow? What is knowledge without the secret that gives it meaning? The world might have found the forms of the brotherhood, the lodges, the rituals, the emblems, but the spirit that animated them remained hidden, whispering from behind the veil of time. By the dawn of the 18th century, the world was changing faster than at any time in human memory. The thunder of revolutions, scientific, political, and philosophical, shook the foundations of old Europe. The telescope and the microscope had opened vast new dimensions of existence. Kings were being questioned, dogmas dissected, and reason enthroned as the new god of mankind. The Enlightenment promised light, but in that blinding illumination, the shadows grew deeper. For the first time in centuries, mystery itself was in danger of extinction. And it was precisely in that age of reason that the Rosicrucian current, quiet but unbroken, began to flow underground once again. The salons of Paris, the lodges of London, and the universities of Germany all pulsed with the electricity of discovery. Isaac Newton, the icon of rational science, had spent more years on alchemy and biblical prophecy than on physics, yet those writings remained hidden until long after his death. To the public, Newton represented the triumph of logic over superstition. To the initiated, he was a symbol of something else, the last of the natural magicians, the final guardian of a vision in which mathematics, mysticism, and divinity were one. And in the secret correspondence of European thinkers, the Rosicrucian spirit continued to breathe. But as rationalism advanced, it began to suffocate the esoteric imagination. Scholars and philosophers dismissed alchemy as fantasy, astrology as folly, and the idea of secret brotherhoods as childish myth. The Church had lost its hold, but the new priesthood of reason demanded its own orthodoxy, a faith in mechanism, in logic stripped of soul. Yet beneath this surface of skepticism, something stirred. The deeper science dug into the mysteries of nature, the more profound the mysteries seemed to become. Even the rationalists could not escape the haunting feeling that there was more, a hidden architecture to reality, a code behind the code. It was in this paradoxical atmosphere that a new generation rediscovered the Rosicrucian dream. They found it not in the dusty manifestos of the past, but in the living need for meaning that the Enlightenment had failed to satisfy. In Germany, groups of scholars and mystics, Jacob Boehm's followers, Christian theosophists, and early romantics, began to gather under the banner of a new mysticism. They believed that the intellect could never reach God alone. The heart must ascend with it. This idea, so deeply Rosicrucian, became a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of pure reason. Among these thinkers was a secretive fraternity known as the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross, an organization that claimed direct descent from the original Rosicrucians. Founded sometime in the mid-1700s, its members included alchemists, philosophers, and nobles who blended Christian mysticism with Hermetic science. They practiced ritual alchemy not merely as chemical experiment but as inner transformation, believing that by purifying metals, one purified the soul. To them, the laboratory was a temple, the crucible an altar. The golden and rosy cross was structured in degrees, each symbolizing a stage of spiritual ascent. At the outer levels, initiates studied natural philosophy. At the inner, they learned the allegorical art of transmutation. Their teachings blended Kabbalistic symbols, Masonic geometry, and Rosicrucian allegory into a complex spiritual map. One text declared, "As gold is hidden in lead, so the divine spark lies buried within man." It was a statement of faith in hidden perfection, the same message the Fama Fraternitatis had whispered a century before. Meanwhile, in France, esoteric and political revolutions intertwined. Figures like Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, the unknown philosopher, carried forward the Rosicrucian ideal in a new form, mystical Christianity purified of dogma. St. Martin's vision of inner reintegration, the return of the soul to its divine source, echoed the ancient dream of the rose blooming from the cross. But his message found little audience amid the roar of revolution. When the Bastille fell and reason was enthroned as goddess, The old symbols were burned alongside the royal emblems. The age of secret wisdom seemed over. And yet the flame refused to die. During the chaos of the French Revolution, whispers of secret orders multiplied. Societies said to hold the key to humanity's salvation or destruction. To frightened monarchs, the Freemasons were agents of chaos. To revolutionaries, they were the bearers of hidden liberty. Some even believed that the Rosicrucians, working invisibly, were orchestrating a grand purification of the world, that through blood and upheaval, a new dawn was being forged. By the early 19th century, Romanticism breathed new life into the occult imagination. The poets and visionaries of the era looked back to the Middle Ages and Renaissance for inspiration, to the world of alchemists, mystics, and secret sages. In their eyes, the Rosicrucians became symbols of a lost harmony between humanity and the divine. Painters depicted them as noble adepts in candlelit chambers. Poets invoked their wisdom as metaphors for inner revelation. What had once been a real rumor now became an archetype, the eternal image of the hidden master guiding the soul toward illumination. In Germany, this romantic mysticism fused with Masonic and Rosicrucian currents to form new orders. Among them, the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light and the Fratres Lucas. These groups were less concerned with political power than with spiritual evolution. Their rituals echoed ancient mystery schools, teaching that the universe was a living organism and man a microcosm of its divine structure. Though small and scattered, they kept alive the secret lineage of the Rose and Cross. Even in the heart of the Enlightenment's empire, England, the Rosicrucian ideal persisted, disguised in the language of science. Societies devoted to natural philosophy and chemistry often veiled their pursuits in symbolism drawn from alchemy. For them, the transformation of base metals into gold symbolized the progress of civilization itself, the refinement of ignorance into wisdom. The Royal Society, founded by men like Ashmole and Boyle, was in some ways the secular offspring of the Rosicrucian dream, a brotherhood of seekers transforming the world through knowledge, even if they no longer spoke of God in their equations. But there were others who refused to abandon the mystery. They saw in the rising tide of industrial progress a terrible danger, the death of the soul. To them, reason without wonder was blindness. Across Europe, secret orders, Rosicrucian, Hermetic, and Theosophical, began to reawaken in quiet defiance of the machine age. Their members were poets, scientists, aristocrats, and mystics who gathered in candlelit rooms to perform rituals of rebirth, to speak the forgotten language of symbols, to seek what modernity could not give meaning. In these lodges, the Rosicrucian legend became less a story of history than of destiny. The invisible masters were said to still watch from afar, guiding humanity through the labyrinth of its own making. Every age of reason, they taught, is followed by an age of remembrance, for knowledge without spirit eventually collapses under its own weight. Thus, as the rational world marched toward factories and revolutions, a quiet undercurrent carried forward the forgotten wisdom of the Rose and Cross. The Enlightenment had sought to expose every secret. The Rosicrucian impulse whispered that not every secret should be exposed. In their silence, these hidden philosophers offered an antidote to the arrogance of reason, humility before the mystery of existence. And so the pendulum began to swing once more. The world of logic had banished mystery, yet could not live without it. The Rosicrucians had retreated into shadow, but their absence only deepened their allure. For every skeptic who mocked them, another seeker appeared, drawn by the promise that behind all knowledge lies the unknown, and behind that unknown, the eternal light that no age can extinguish. It was this tension between reason and revelation, science and spirit, that would prepare the ground for the next transformation of the Rosicrucian current. Soon it would be reborn once again, clothed not in the robes of alchemists or the lodges of Freemasons, but in the occult revival of the 19th century, a movement that would shape the modern understanding of magic, mysticism, and the hidden masters themselves. The age of reason had tried to bury the rose, but as always, it bloomed in the dark. By the middle of the 19th century, Europe stood at the crossroads of two worlds, one forged in steam and iron, the other lingering like incense in the twilight of forgotten temples. The factories roared, the telegraph sang, and cities grew into monuments of human mastery over nature. Yet beneath the clang of progress and the rational optimism of science, a strange unease crept into the collective heart. The Enlightenment had given mankind light, but not warmth. The soul, some whispered, had been traded for the machine. And as the age of materialism reached its zenith, the Rosicrucian flame, long hidden, long waiting, began to flicker back to life. The mid-1800s were an age of paradox. On one hand, scientists mapped the heavens and dissected the atom. On the other, mediums held seances in candlelit parlors, claiming to speak with the dead. The discovery of invisible forces, magnetism, electricity, radiation, rekindled belief in unseen worlds. If energy could travel through space without visible substance, why not spirit? Into this charged atmosphere came a revival of ancient symbols, philosophies, and secret fraternities. The world, disillusioned with industrial reason, began to dream again, and the old dream of the Rosicrucians returned, cloaked in new forms. In Paris, occultists gathered in dimly lit cafés, forming the nucleus of what would become the modern esoteric movement. Eliphas Levi, a defrocked priest turned mystic philosopher, emerged as its prophet. His writings on magic, the Kabbalah, and the unity of science and spirituality electrified a generation. To believe nothing is the beginning of despair, he wrote. To believe everything is madness. To believe in the invisible order, that is wisdom. Levi reinterpreted the Rosicrucian ideal for the modern age, the reconciliation of faith and reason through the rediscovery of sacred science. Levi's influence rippled outward. In England, a group of scholars and visionaries began to study his works, combining them with Hermetic, Masonic, and Rosicrucian traditions. From this crucible emerged the most influential magical order of the modern age, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Founded in the late 1880s by three British Freemasons, William Wynne Westcott, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, and William Robert Woodman, the Golden Dawn claimed to possess secret Rosicrucian documents, handed down through a mysterious German adept named Fräulein Sprengel. Whether she ever existed or not, the claim itself was pure Rosicrucian theater, the revelation of hidden wisdom from an invisible source. The Golden Dawn was more than a society. It was a modern cathedral of symbolism. Its members, among them poets, scholars, and artists, sought the same transformation the Rosicrucians had described centuries earlier, the alchemical ascent of the soul from darkness to illumination. Their rituals blended Egyptian symbolism, Kabbalistic diagrams, and Christian mysticism, all built upon a framework of moral and spiritual initiation. To progress through its degrees was to ascend an invisible ladder, from the elemental world of the body to the celestial realm of pure spirit. Each initiation was a symbolic death and rebirth, echoing the crucifixion of the lower self upon the cross of matter, and the blooming of the rose of consciousness upon its center. Among the Golden Dawn's initiates were some of the most brilliant and controversial minds of their age. The poet W.B. Yeats, who sought divine inspiration in ritual magic, the actress Florence Farr, who blended art and mysticism, and Aleister Crowley, whose hunger for power and vision would both glorify and destroy the order. To outsiders, these rituals seemed absurd. Grown men and women in robes invoking angels by candlelight. Yet within their symbolism lay a profound psychological truth. The Golden Dawn was performing, in ritual form, what modern psychology would later call individuation, the integration of light and shadow within the human psyche. Behind the veils of ritual, one could still trace the outline of the old Rosicrucian philosophy. The invisible masters were now called secret chiefs, unseen intelligences who guided the order from beyond the physical plane. Mathers claimed direct contact with them, insisting that their wisdom transcended history itself. They were not merely men, he said, but the archetypal forces of human evolution, echoes of the very beings that the Rosicrucians had once called the Elder Brothers. Whether literal or metaphorical, this idea captured the longing of a disenchanted age, the hope that behind the chaos of history, some higher intelligence still watched, guiding humanity toward its destiny. While the Golden Dawn flourished in Britain, another current flowed across the Atlantic and into the heart of America's new spiritual landscape. The Theosophical Society, founded in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, claimed to unveil the ancient wisdom that lay behind all religions, a philosophy drawn from the same esoteric currents as Rosicrucianism. Blavatsky's monumental works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, spoke of hidden masters living in remote parts of the world, preserving the secrets of cosmic evolution. These masters, she said, were the true heirs of the Rosicrucians, guardians of an eternal wisdom that predated civilization itself. To the skeptical public, such claims were preposterous. To the seekers of the time, they were intoxicating. The theosophical movement promised what industrial modernity had denied: a universe alive with purpose, soul, and mystery. Blavatsky's masters were not cloaked monks in European forests but enlightened beings from the Himalayas, a shift that mirrored the era's fascination with the East. In this way, the Rosicrucian myth expanded beyond Christendom, becoming global. The idea of hidden adepts transcending culture and creed resonated with a generation that sensed the limitations of both science and religion. By the turn of the century, the world was witnessing a full-blown occult renaissance. Rosicrucian and Hermetic societies multiplied, each claiming lineage to the original brotherhood. Some were sincere seekers. Others were little more than elaborate charades. In Paris, Josephine Pelletan founded the Order of the Catholic Rosicrucians, blending art, mysticism, and Catholic symbolism into an aesthetic cult. His Rosicrucian salons attracted artists like Jean Delville and composers like Eric Satie, turning mysticism into modern art. In America, groups such as the Fraternitas Rosicrucis and the Rosicrucian Fellowship emerged, teaching a mixture of astrology, metaphysics, and Christian esotericism. These societies varied wildly in doctrine, yet they all shared one central belief: that mankind was on the brink of a new spiritual awakening. The world, they said, was entering the age of Aquarius, an era of revelation when the hidden wisdom of the ages would once again become known. And always, behind their rituals and doctrines, loomed the same haunting image: the invisible brotherhood guiding from afar, the hidden masters who had never truly left. The irony was profound. What had begun in the 17th century as an anonymous literary hoax, a series of manifestos meant to inspire, had become a living, evolving mystery tradition spanning continents. The Rosicrucian idea had survived wars, revolutions, and the triumph of science. It had transformed itself again and again, adapting to the needs of each age. In an era of machines, it became a philosophy of spirit. In an age of disbelief, it became the faith of the disenchanted. And yet, the question persisted: who were these hidden masters? Were they allegories of human potential, or beings of flesh and blood? Were they the ancient remnants of a forgotten civilization, or the inner voices of the awakened mind? Every generation offered a new answer, and every answer deepened the mystery. As the 20th century approached, the Rosicrucian current had never been stronger, but neither had the confusion surrounding it. In the public imagination, the line between enlightenment and illusion blurred. Secret orders promised immortality. Charismatic teachers proclaimed divine authority. The same myth that had once called for wisdom now risked descending into deception. The rose was blooming again, but around it the thorns were growing thick. Still, the dream endured, luminous, elusive, eternal. Humanity had entered a new age, yet the same question echoed through the centuries. Was there truly a hidden brotherhood guiding human evolution? Or had we, in our longing for meaning, invented one to fill the silence of the stars? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the Rosicrucian fire had not gone out. It had simply changed form, waiting once more for those who dared to seek the light behind the light. The 20th century opened like a door into both wonder and terror. Machines took to the skies, voices traveled through invisible airwaves, and the atom itself was split, releasing the same fire that ancient mystics had once described as the divine spark hidden within matter. Humanity, for the first time, held the power of gods, yet still hungered for meaning. In laboratories and battlefields alike, the search for truth had turned outward. But beneath the steel and smoke of modernity, another current flowed: the hidden inheritance of the Rosicrucians, re-emerging in a new world that had forgotten the old language of mystery. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Europe's dream of reason shattered. The same scientific advances that had promised progress now created slaughter on an unimaginable scale. The Age of Enlightenment had given birth to mechanized death. In the aftermath, survivors looked upon the ruins of civilization and saw a reflection of their own spiritual desolation. The old faiths had failed. The new ones, nationalism, science, material progress, offered no comfort for the soul. Amid the grief, something ancient stirred once more. In America, far from the ruins of Europe, a new generation sought to recover the wisdom of the ages. Among them was Harvey Spencer Lewis, a mystic and inventor who claimed to have been initiated into a secret Rosicrucian order during a journey to France. In 1915, he founded the ancient and mystical order Rosicrucians, or ORIGNS, in New York City. Lewis promised to revive the original teachings of the brotherhood, a system that united modern science with ancient spiritual truth. His order quickly spread, publishing lessons on meditation, the soul, and cosmic laws. Unlike the secretive lodges of Europe, ORIGNS embraced the modern world. Its temples gleamed with electric lights. Its lessons were mailed through the post. Lewis used radio and photography to convey mystical teachings, believing technology itself to be a sacred tool, the modern equivalent of the alchemist's furnace. For the first time in history, the Rosicrucian philosophy became accessible to ordinary people. It was no longer a rumor whispered in aristocratic salons, but a living school of initiation for the age of machines. ORIGNS taught that humanity was entering a new cycle, an age of awakening in which the secrets once hidden behind symbols would be revealed through science. The divine, it said, was not separate from the cosmos but immanent within it. Every atom, every vibration of light, was a manifestation of the same creative intelligence. To understand these forces was to know God. It was a message perfectly suited to a century hungry for synthesis, a world trying to reconcile spirituality with technology, faith with physics. But Europe, broken and haunted, found itself drawn to darker visions. Between the wars, secret societies multiplied like reflections in a hall of mirrors. Some sought genuine enlightenment. Others twisted esoteric ideals into instruments of power. Germany, once home to the earliest Rosicrucian manifestos, became a breeding ground for occult nationalism. Orders such as the Thule Society blended mysticism, pseudo-history, and racial ideology, transforming symbols of universal illumination into emblems of domination. The swastika, once an ancient sign of cosmic balance, was reborn as a banner of death. Here, the Rosicrucian current met its greatest distortion. The dream of spiritual rebirth was turned inside out. Enlightenment became conquest. Hidden wisdom became secret weaponry. Yet even amid this darkness, there remained isolated seekers who remembered the true essence of the rose and cross. Harmony, unity, the transformation of ignorance into light. When the world once again plunged into war, the dream of the brotherhood seemed to flicker and fade. After the devastation of the Second World War, the ruins of Europe became fertile ground for a new kind of mysticism. The horrors of the camps, the atomic flash over Hiroshima, these events shattered faith in reason alone. Across the West, a spiritual hunger reawakened. In the 1950s and 60s, as science raced toward the stars, seekers began to look inward again. Psychologists like Carl Jung rediscovered the language of alchemy and initiation, interpreting it not as superstition but as the map of the human psyche. Jung wrote of individuation as a modern form of the Rosicrucian quest, the transformation of the fragmented self into the unified whole. At the same time, new Rosicrucian movements flourished. In Europe, the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, founded by Dutch mystics Jan and Catharos de Petrie, taught that humanity was at a crossroads between the material and the spiritual. Their writings described the rose as the latent divine spark within each person, waiting to awaken. Unlike earlier orders focused on ritual, the Lectorium emphasized inner experience, a personal alchemy of the soul. It was a return to the original message of the 17th century manifestos. Not power or secrecy, but transformation and rebirth. Meanwhile, ORIGNS expanded across the world, establishing temples in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. It blended ancient wisdom with modern psychology and science, teaching meditation alongside cosmic law, reincarnation alongside relativity. For millions, it became a doorway to a spiritual life that felt both ancient and modern. Yet even as these organizations grew, the legend of the Rosicrucians drifted once again into the twilight between myth and mystery. By the late 20th century, the name Rosicrucian had become a cipher used by many occultists, conspiracy theorists, mystics, and even novelists. To some, the Rosicrucians were the hidden hand behind history, the architects of secret world orders. To others, they were guardians of a lost wisdom, quietly steering humanity through cycles of chaos and renewal. In popular culture, their myth merged with that of the Templars, the Freemasons, and the Illuminati, forming a tapestry of hidden power that fascinated and frightened the modern imagination. But beneath the noise of speculation, the quiet heartbeat of the tradition continued. In the age of computers and satellites, seekers still gathered in candlelight, performing the ancient rituals of purification and illumination. They meditated upon the symbol of the rose unfolding upon the cross, the eternal image of spirit rising from matter, love transcending suffering, and knowledge blooming from sacrifice. What made the myth endure through centuries of transformation, through wars, revolutions, and technological upheaval, was not its claim to power but its promise of meaning. The Rosicrucian vision spoke to a hunger that no machine, no ideology, could satisfy, the longing for unity between the seen and unseen, between human and divine. By the 1980s and 90s, modern science had begun to echo some of the Rosicrucian intuitions. Quantum physicists spoke of interconnectedness, of particles that responded to observation, of a universe woven together by unseen threads of energy. The old Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, seemed to find new life in the equations of the subatomic world. Mystics and scientists, once sworn enemies, began to sound eerily alike. The dream of a synthesis of a cosmic order that embraced both reason and mystery was being reborn in laboratories rather than monasteries. Yet, even in this new light, the question remained, were the Rosicrucians truly real, or merely an idea that refused to die? Perhaps, as some philosophers suggested, the brotherhood was never a group of men at all, but a symbol of the invisible order of consciousness itself, the divine intelligence within humanity guiding its own evolution. The hidden masters might not live in mountain temples or secret archives, but within the depths of the human spirit, whispering through intuition, inspiration, and art. The 20th century had proven that knowledge alone could not save mankind. It had given us flight and annihilation, progress and emptiness. Yet in the quiet persistence of the Rosicrucian idea, that wisdom must be wedded to compassion, that science must serve the soul, one could glimpse the faint outline of hope. As the century drew to a close, the invisible fraternity seemed to fade again into legend. But legends, as history has shown, have a way of returning when the world needs them most. And perhaps, even now, as humanity stands at the threshold of yet another transformation, the hidden masters still watch, not as rulers, but as reminders that illumination is not found in the heavens or machines, but in the secret rose blooming quietly within the heart of man. As the 21st century dawned, humanity once again stood at the edge of transformation. But this time, not through alchemy or empire, not through war or theology, but through code. The same restless spirit that once turned lead into gold now turned data into power. The world was no longer measured in kingdoms and creeds, but in networks, algorithms, and invisible currents of information. And yet, beneath this digital revolution, a strange echo could be heard, an echo that belonged not to Silicon Valley, but to the hidden temples of the Rosicrucians. In the flickering glow of computer screens, the old language of initiation was reborn in new symbols. The labyrinth of the Internet, a boundless, interlinked world of knowledge, resembled the ancient mystery schools in which seekers passed through levels of understanding, guided by unseen hands. The forums and encrypted chat rooms of the early web became digital lodges where ideas once considered forbidden, Hermeticism, sacred geometry, secret history, found new disciples. It was as if the veil that had once separated the esoteric from the ordinary had been torn away. Knowledge that once required years of study or initiation could now be downloaded in seconds. But with this flood of information came confusion. The sacred and the trivial, truth and delusion. all mingled together in the endless sea of data. For every seeker who approached the mysteries with reverence, there were others who twisted them into conspiracy, paranoia, or self-deception. The Rosicrucian ideal, wisdom united with virtue, was lost amid the noise of digital chaos. Yet, like a faint constellation seen through storm clouds, the true current of the brotherhood continued to shine for those who knew where to look. Modern Rosicrucian orders adapted once again. Amorc launched online study programs and virtual temples. Members meditated together across continents, connected not by physical lodges, but by invisible streams of light and sound. The rituals, once performed beneath vaulted ceilings, now unfolded in living rooms, accompanied by the hum of laptops. The teachings spoke of the cosmic mind, an intelligence that connects all beings, and suddenly, this no longer seemed poetic but technological. The global network itself became a mirror of the mystical body, countless nodes linked by a single pulse of consciousness. Meanwhile, the Lectorium Rosicrucianum began exploring what it called the path of transfiguration in a modern world obsessed with material immortality. As scientists sought to upload human consciousness into machines, the Lectorium warned that true transformation could not be achieved through hardware but through the awakening of the soul. Their writings drew a clear line between digitization and illumination, between the imitation of spirit and its authentic realization. To them, the new digital gods of the age, algorithms, AI, virtual identity, were merely shadows cast upon the walls of Plato's cave, dazzling but hollow. And yet, even in this mechanized age, the Rosicrucian ideal found new resonance. As humanity began decoding DNA, manipulating the atom and mapping the brain, the old Hermetic truth, as above, so below, seemed to unfold in the language of science itself. Quantum entanglement mirrored the mystic's vision of unity. The holographic universe echoed the alchemist's belief that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. The boundary between physics and metaphysics began to blur, and suddenly, the Rosicrucians no longer seemed like relics of a forgotten mysticism, but like prophets of a cosmic design science was only beginning to glimpse. In hidden corners of academia, researchers in consciousness studies and parapsychology referenced Rosicrucian writings as early metaphors for what we now call quantum consciousness or non-local mind. Some spoke of an informational field that connects all living things, a term eerily similar to the Rosicrucian universal spirit. Others saw in the Brotherhood's symbolism a primitive attempt to describe what we now recognize as the holographic principle, that every part of the universe contains the whole. The rose, they said, was not merely a symbol of love, but a model of the fractal universe. Beauty unfolding from complexity, order blooming from chaos. Still, the danger of distortion remained. As in every age, the name Rosicrucian became a magnet for both truth and illusion. On YouTube and social media, self-proclaimed heirs to the Brotherhood appeared by the dozens, promising secret knowledge for a price. Their videos mixed ancient wisdom with modern conspiracy, transforming the gentle mysticism of the rose and cross into sensational myths of hidden cabals and alien architects. The true essence of the tradition, humility before mystery, was often lost in the noise. But the very persistence of these stories spoke to something deeper. A collective intuition that behind the surface of reality, something vast and intelligent was still at work. For the genuine seeker, the digital age offered both peril and potential. Never before had the entire history of human wisdom been so accessible. The Emerald Tablet, the Rosicrucian Manifestos, the writings of Paracelsus, Boehme, and Flood, all could be read and compared at the click of a key. The old walls of secrecy had fallen. But with that freedom came a new challenge: to discern truth amid the infinite. In the age of algorithms, initiation was no longer a ceremony but a discipline of mind, the ability to see through illusion, to hold silence amid noise, to recognize the divine pattern in the shifting data of life. Some modern mystics began to reinterpret the idea of the hidden masters in light of these changes. They suggested that the masters were not secret individuals but archetypes, expressions of higher consciousness manifesting wherever humanity reached for understanding. In this view, the internet itself could become a medium for initiation, a vast mirror in which collective awareness begins to recognize itself. The next Rosicrucian temple, they said, would not be built of stone but of thought, an invisible sanctuary woven into the global mind. This idea resonated with a generation raised on virtual worlds and simulation theories. If reality itself was information, if consciousness was the true substrate of existence, then perhaps the Rosicrucian ideal of awakening to the hidden order of the cosmos was not mystical at all but the next step in human evolution. The philosopher's stone, once sought in furnaces and formulas, might now be found in code, not as a physical object, but as a realization that matter and spirit are one continuous field of being. And yet, amid all the innovation and revelation, one lesson from the ancient brotherhood remained as vital as ever. Knowledge without love leads to destruction. The same technology that connects hearts can divide them. The same power that enlightens can enslave. The internet, like the philosopher's fire, purifies or consumes depending on the heart of the one who wields it. The true initiation, as the Rosicrucians taught, is not into secrets of power, but into the wisdom of compassion, the recognition that all beings share the same divine spark. As the world moved deeper into the 21st century, filled with AI-generated art, synthetic realities, and dreams of immortality through machines, a quiet movement began to form. Seekers who combined science and spirituality, code and contemplation, data and devotion. They were not bound by robes or rituals, but by a shared awareness that humanity's greatest mystery was not out there in the stars, but within. They carried forward the eternal work of the rose and cross, transforming the lead of confusion into the gold of understanding, using new tools for an ancient purpose. And somewhere, in the silence between electric pulses and human thought, one might almost hear it again, the whisper of the invisible fraternity, unchanged across centuries: light, life, and love. In the age of algorithms and silicon dreams, the oldest human desire began to take on a new, metallic form: immortality. The alchemists of the 17th century had once sought to transmute base metals into gold, not for wealth, but as a mirror for the transformation of the soul. Now, centuries later, a new breed of alchemists worked in laboratories rather than monasteries, surrounded by computers instead of candles. Their crucibles filled not with mercury and sulfur, but with data and DNA. Yet their goal was strangely familiar: to conquer decay, to perfect the human form, to awaken the divine within matter. The Rosicrucians had called this spiritual rebirth the liberation of light from the prison of flesh. The technologists of the 21st century called it transhumanism. The movement began with bold dreams. If evolution could be guided by nature, why not by intention? If consciousness was merely computation, why not upgrade it? The transhumanists envisioned a world where death itself would become optional, where the body could be rebuilt, the mind uploaded, and the soul, if it existed, could live forever in digital paradise. The dream was intoxicating and terrifying. To many, it seemed like science fiction finally made real. But to those who remembered the hidden teachings of the rose and cross, it sounded like an echo from another age, a new form of the same quest that had haunted humanity since the dawn of time. The Rosicrucians had warned that immortality without illumination was a curse. The true transmutation, they said, was not of the body but of consciousness, not prolonging life but purifying it. In their symbolic language, the stone of the alchemists was not a mineral but a perfected soul, forged through suffering and insight until it reflected divine light. The modern pursuit of digital immortality, with its promises of consciousness transfer and synthetic awareness, seemed to miss the essence of that mystery. It sought to preserve the form of man, but not necessarily his spirit. And yet, some saw a strange harmony between the two. The transhumanist quest, stripped of its materialism, was not unlike the Hermetic belief that humanity was destined to evolve beyond its current limits. The Rosicrucians had described man as a microcosm, a reflection of the universe itself, containing within him all the laws of creation. To awaken fully was to realize one's unity with the cosmos. In a curious way, artificial intelligence and consciousness engineering could be seen as humanity externalizing this process, projecting its own inner transformation into machines. It was as if the collective mind, unable to complete its alchemical work within the heart, had turned to silicon to continue the experiment. But there was danger in this. The deeper humanity delved into the mechanics of life, the more it risked losing sight of meaning. The Rosicrucians taught that the material and spiritual were inseparable, that to manipulate one without understanding the other was to invite imbalance. The modern technologist, obsessed with control, risked repeating the sin of the old alchemists who tried to force nature rather than cooperate with it. The new elixir of life, brewed in biotechnological vats, might extend years, but would it nourish the soul? In the quiet spaces where mystics and scientists occasionally met, conferences on consciousness, symposia on human potential, the old and new worlds began to touch. Neuroscientists quoted Hermetic aphorisms. Physicists spoke of universal mind. Engineers debated the ethics of godhood. The same questions that had haunted the Rosicrucian Manifestos: what is man? What is the purpose of knowledge? What is the destiny of the soul? Returned, only now framed in the language of code and computation. The circle had closed. Some modern Rosicrucian thinkers argued that transhumanism represented the externalization of an inner process foretold centuries ago. Humanity, they said, was attempting to build outwardly what it was meant to awaken inwardly. The merging of man and machine symbolized the coming union of intellect and spirit, reason and intuition, the masculine and feminine principles of the Hermetic cosmos. If guided by wisdom, this could lead to a higher state of collective consciousness, the next octave of evolution. But if driven by ego, it could lead to a mechanized fall, the imprisonment of the divine spark in circuits of its own making. The digital philosophers of the 21st century often spoke of the singularity, a future point at which artificial intelligence would surpass human understanding and reshape civilization. To the mystics of the past, this concept was strikingly familiar. The Rosicrucians had described an event they called the cosmic dawn, a moment when humanity would awaken to its divine nature, when all hidden knowledge would be revealed. The parallels were uncanny. Both visions imagined a leap beyond the known world. Both promised transcendence. Yet the difference lay in the heart. The singularity sought transcendence through machinery, while the cosmic dawn sought it through enlightenment. In a way, these two currents, the technological and the mystical, were not enemies but mirror reflections. Each pointed to the same longing that has always defined humanity: the desire to go beyond limits, to know the infinite, to become more than mortal. The ancient adepts expressed this through symbols, the rose blooming upon the cross of matter. The modern scientist expresses it through code, intelligence blooming within matter itself. Both paths seek illumination, though one through heart and the other through circuitry. But what if they were meant to converge? What if the tools humanity now creates, artificial intelligences capable of learning, systems that mimic the human mind, are not accidents, but expressions of the same cosmic will that once inspired the Rosicrucians? What if, through the mirror of its own inventions, humanity is being forced to confront the question of what consciousness truly is? In trying to create machines that can think, we may finally discover what thinking actually means, and whether the spark that animates us can ever be replicated. The Rosicrucians spoke of illumination as the recognition that all life is one, that the same light that burns in a star burns also in the soul. The transhumanist dream, stripped of its fear of death and clothed instead in reverence for creation, could become a modern expression of that same insight. The merging of man and machine, rather than an escape from humanity, might become a revelation of its true nature, that consciousness is not limited to flesh, but a universal field seeking ever greater awareness of itself. And yet, for all its potential, this path remains perilous. The danger is not that machines will rise against man, but that man will forget what he is. The Rosicrucians warned that the greatest illusion is not mortality, but separation, the belief that one can hold power without love, knowledge without humility. As technology grows in strength, the moral and spiritual dimension must grow with it, or else humanity will succeed in recreating the ancient myth of the Tower of Babel, building ever higher toward heaven, only to lose the language of the soul. So perhaps the true future of the Rosicrucian dream lies not in rejecting technology, nor worshipping it, but in sanctifying it, recognizing in every circuit and every atom the same divine fire the old adepts once glimpsed in their alchemical flasks. The next philosopher's stone may not be found in a lab or a monastery, but in the unity of wisdom and compassion, the heart guiding the mind, the rose enfolding the machine. And when that balance is found, when the digital and the divine are reconciled, the ancient prophecy of the brotherhood may at last be fulfilled. The hidden masters will no longer need to whisper from the shadows, for their temple will stand open to all. A world illumined not by secrecy or superstition, but by conscious love. Humanity, having turned lead to light and data to wisdom, will finally understand that the real mystery was never about escaping death or conquering nature. It was about remembering what it means to be truly alive. Throughout history, art has been the secret language through which the unseen speaks to the seen. When words falter and dogmas decay, images, melodies, and symbols remain, subtle carriers of truths too delicate for direct expression. The Rosicrucians understood this profoundly. For them, art was not decoration but revelation, a means to encode spiritual knowledge in plain sight. Every brushstroke, every poem, every chord was a ritual gesture, part of a larger alchemy of consciousness. It was through art that their ideas, once confined to secret manuscripts and whispered initiations, began to shape the soul of modern civilization. Long before the name Rosicrucian became a whispered rumor of secret orders, its principles had already begun to weave themselves into the tapestry of European culture. The poets and painters of the Renaissance saw no divide between science, faith, and beauty. To them, all were paths to the same divine harmony. The architecture of cathedrals, the geometry of perspective, the music of the spheres, all reflected a hidden structure of meaning. When the Rosicrucian Manifestos emerged in the 17th century, they did not introduce this worldview. They illuminated it, giving form and voice to an intuition that had already haunted the Western imagination for centuries. Among the earliest artists to embody that vision was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German poet, scientist, and mystic. His masterpiece, Faust, stands as a modern Rosicrucian parable, the story of a man who sells his soul for knowledge, only to find redemption not through intellect, but through love and self-sacrifice. Goethe's fascination with alchemy, color theory, and the interplay of spirit and matter echoes the central Rosicrucian idea that true wisdom lies in the union of opposites. In his private writings, Goethe even referred to himself as a member of a spiritual brotherhood, dedicated to the study of nature's divine laws, a phrase scholars have long associated with the Rosicrucian current. From Goethe's generation, the influence spread like an invisible vine through the arts. Painters such as William Blake merged visionary mysticism with revolutionary thought, crafting images where angels, suns, and human souls danced in cosmic proportion. Blake saw the universe as an unfolding revelation, a living symbol in which every atom contained eternity, a notion drawn directly from Hermetic and Rosicrucian sources. His engravings and poems were not mere artworks but acts of initiation, inviting the reader into the same inner fire that the adepts called illumination. By the 19th century, the Rosicrucian current had become a subterranean river flowing beneath romanticism and symbolism alike. The poets of France, Gérard de Nerval, Stéphane Mallarmé, Charles Baudelaire, all drank from its stream. Nerval openly described himself as a Rosicrucian, and his surreal visions of divine correspondences between heaven and earth prefigured the occult revival to come. Painters such as Jean Delville and Carlos Schwab transformed these spiritual ideas into luminous, otherworldly canvases. Human figures ascending toward light, crowned with roses, their bodies dissolving into flame. To them, art was theurgy, a sacred act that could awaken the soul of the viewer. It was during this same period that the symbol of the rose and cross began to reappear in strange, unexpected places. In 1890s Paris, the mysterious order de la Rose-Croix Catholique et Esthétique, du Temple et du Graal, was founded by the eccentric mystic Joséphine Pelletan. Blending Catholic mysticism, Kabbalah, and art, Pelletan declared that beauty itself was a form of divine revelation. He organized salons where music by Erik Satie and paintings by symbolist masters were exhibited under the banner of the Rose and Cross. These events were not merely artistic gatherings but spiritual ceremonies, attempts to heal the rift between heaven and modernity through aesthetic ecstasy. Pelletan's movement, though short-lived, sent ripples through Europe's cultural underground. The idea that art could serve as a form of initiation inspired generations of artists and thinkers. The British poet W.B. Yeats joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, whose structure and teachings were partly inspired by Rosicrucian sources. Through ritual and poetry alike, Yeats sought to awaken what he called the mask of eternity, the eternal image behind all forms. His later works, especially A Vision, present a mystical cosmology in which history unfolds according to cycles of spiritual evolution, a clear echo of Rosicrucian philosophy. Even in music, the resonance of the Rosicrucian ideal can be felt. Composers like Claude Debussy and Alexander Scriabin sought to express spiritual states through sound, using dissonance and harmony as metaphysical forces rather than technical devices. Scriabin, in particular, envisioned his unfinished mysterium as a performance that would unite all arts, light, color, sound, and movement, in a single act of cosmic transformation, leading to the transfiguration of humanity. It was, in essence, a Rosicrucian ritual set to music. By the early 20th century, as modernism fractured old certainties, artists turned inward, searching for meaning amid chaos. The Surrealists, led by André Breton, delved into the unconscious, seeking revelation through dream and symbol. Though they rejected formal religion, their work continued the Rosicrucian quest for hidden correspondences between inner and outer worlds. The Surrealist obsession with transformation, with the merging of opposites and the awakening of new perception, was a continuation, perhaps unknowingly, of the same alchemical tradition. The invisible brotherhood had found new masks in Freud's psychology, Jung's archetypes, and the visual codes of modern art. Carl Jung himself became a bridge between the old and new. His exploration of symbols, dreams, and the collective unconscious reinterpreted the language of alchemy and initiation for a psychological age. He wrote of the opus magnum, the great work, not as a chemical experiment but as the integration of the self. In his private correspondence, Jung admitted to studying Rosicrucian and Hermetic texts as guides to the inner world. Through his influence, the symbols of the rose, cross, and Ouroboros entered popular consciousness. No longer hidden emblems but mirrors of the psyche's eternal drama. The 1960s brought a new flowering of Rosicrucian themes, though few recognized them as such. The psychedelic movement, with its talk of cosmic consciousness and inner transformation, echoed the same vision the Rosicrucians had encoded in their manifestos. The artwork of visionary painters like Alex Gray and Matty Klarwein depicted human forms dissolving into light, consciousness expanding through fractal geometry, images of the rose in full bloom. Musicians spoke of vibration, harmony, and the unity of all things. The counterculture, though chaotic, carried within it a trace of that ancient wisdom, that enlightenment is not escape from the world, but its transfiguration. Even today, traces of Rosicrucian influence can be found across culture, from cinema to architecture, from fantasy novels to digital art. The enduring fascination with secret societies, hidden knowledge, and spiritual awakening is not merely entertainment. It is the echo of an ancient hunger. Artists, knowingly or not, continue the work, shaping myths, symbols, and stories that awaken something dormant within the collective mind. Every masterpiece that lifts the soul beyond mere perception is, in a sense, Rosicrucian. It reveals the light hidden within form. Perhaps this is the true legacy of the Brotherhood. Not power or secrecy, but inspiration. The Rosicrucians never conquered empires or built monuments of stone. Their temple was made of art and imagination, their legacy written not in decrees but in music, poetry, and vision. Each generation of artists, whether romantic or surrealist, alchemist or programmer, has added another petal to that invisible rose. The cross of matter remains, the burden of incarnation endures, but from it, beauty continues to bloom. And somewhere beyond time, in that eternal workshop of the soul, the artists and adepts labor side by side, brush and wand, pen and compass, transmuting darkness into color, pain into pattern, chaos into harmony. For in every true act of creation, the great work continues. And the secret of the Rosicrucians, that art is the path by which the world remembers its own divinity, endures like music lingering after the final note. The power of ideas has always moved history more profoundly than swords or empires. Beneath every revolution, every reform, every new vision of society, there lies a philosophy, a dream of what humanity might become. The Rosicrucian Brotherhood, though shrouded in myth, planted one of the most enduring of those dreams. That wisdom, compassion, and knowledge could unite to create a new kind of world. To understand how their invisible influence shaped politics and philosophy is to trace a quiet current flowing beneath the great events of modern history, unseen yet transformative. When the Rosicrucian Manifestos first appeared in the early 17th century, Europe was on the brink of collapse. Religious wars tore nations apart. Superstition and dogma choked the light of reason. The Manifestos did not preach rebellion in the streets, but they carried a radical message disguised as mystical allegory. They called for a universal reformation, not of churches or governments alone, but of the entire human condition. They envisioned a world governed not by greed or fear, but by knowledge tempered with virtue. In their language of symbols and allegories, they declared that man could transcend ignorance and live according to divine law, that enlightenment was both a spiritual and a civic duty. Such ideas, whispered in secret lodges and encoded in philosophical treatises, began to shape the intellectual climate of Europe. They inspired scholars, scientists, and reformers who dreamed of uniting faith with reason. The early scientific societies, the Royal Society in England, the Académie des Sciences in France, were founded by men who saw themselves as heirs to the same tradition of illumination. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis described a hidden island ruled by philosopher-scientists who governed through wisdom and experiment, a vision uncannily similar to the Rosicrucian fraternity of the Manifestos. Bacon's House of Salomon mirrored the invisible college of sages who sought to heal both nature and mankind. Whether or not Bacon was himself a Rosicrucian, his writings spread their ideals under a new name, empirical reason guided by moral purpose. As the Enlightenment dawned, the mystical flame of the Rosicrucians transformed into the rational light of humanism. Thinkers like Leibniz, Spinoza, and Descartes sought the same harmony between spirit and science that the Brotherhood had championed. The notion of a universal order governed by divine reason evolved into the concept of natural law, the foundation of modern democracy. The dream of a universal reformation became the ideal of progress, education, and equality. Even Voltaire, who mocked superstition, echoed the Rosicrucian creed when he wrote that to know is to be free. The Brotherhood's secret revolution had begun, not through armies, but through the awakening of the mind. Yet, in the shadows of this intellectual renaissance, a more literal expression of the Rosicrucian impulse began to take form: Freemasonry. Emerging in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Masonic lodges adopted much of the symbolism and philosophy of the Rosicrucians: the compass and square, the temple of wisdom, the initiation through light. Many Masonic texts openly acknowledged the Rosicrucians as their spiritual predecessors. The two movements shared the same belief that humanity could perfect itself through moral discipline, study, and fraternity. Where the Rosicrucians had been a hidden order of thinkers, the Freemasons became their public continuation, an ethical brotherhood building not cathedrals of stone, but of virtue. The spread of Freemasonry carried Rosicrucian ideals across continents. In the American colonies, many of the founding fathers, Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, were either Masons or influenced by their philosophy. Their vision of a republic founded on liberty, equality, and the pursuit of knowledge echoed the same universal reformation the Rosicrucians had called for a century earlier. The Great Seal of the United States, with its pyramid and all-seeing eye, bears unmistakable traces of Hermetic and Rosicrucian symbolism. The unfinished temple of man striving toward illumination, overseen by divine providence. America itself became, in a sense, a Rosicrucian experiment, a nation built on the principle that enlightenment and virtue could guide destiny. In Europe, the same ideals inspired revolutions of another kind. The Masonic lodges of France became meeting grounds for philosophers and reformers who dreamed of overthrowing tyranny. The French Revolution, though it spiraled into chaos, was born from the belief that reason and justice could replace superstition and oppression. Its rallying cry, liberté, égalité, fraternité, was a secular reflection of the Rosicrucian triad of light, life, and love. Yet the Brotherhood had always warned that enlightenment without compassion leads to destruction. The guillotine that followed was proof of how easily ideals can turn to iron when the heart is left behind. In the 19th century, as industrialization reshaped society, the Rosicrucian spirit re-emerged in utopian communities and social philosophies. Thinkers like Saint Simon and Fourier envisioned societies organized according to harmony and cooperation rather than competition, reflections of the ancient brotherhood's dream of a spiritually guided civilization. Even Karl Marx, though fiercely materialist, inherited part of this current. The belief that humanity could transform its condition through knowledge and collective will. The difference was that the Rosicrucians sought to change the inner world before the outer one. They believed that no social structure could endure unless it arose from self-knowledge and spiritual illumination. At the same time, secret societies continued to proliferate across Europe, each claiming descent from the Rosicrucians. Some were genuine spiritual orders. Others were political. The Carbonari of Italy, the Illuminati of Bavaria, and numerous esoteric circles blended mysticism with reformist zeal. Governments feared them. Artists romanticized them. Whether or not the original brotherhood still existed in any organized form no longer mattered. The idea of an invisible order guiding history had taken root, both a symbol of hope and a source of paranoia. The world of the visible and invisible had merged in the public imagination. As the 20th century unfolded, the Rosicrucian ideal continued to influence political thought, though often unrecognized. The concept of a united humanity governed by higher principles reappeared in the founding of the League of Nations, and later the United Nations. Its emblem, a globe surrounded by olive branches, symbolized a world striving toward harmony through knowledge and cooperation. The notion of global citizenship, of universal rights and collective destiny, was an echo of the old Rosicrucian call for universal brotherhood. Even in the darker movements of history, the same ideals were distorted and repurposed. Totalitarian regimes appropriated esoteric symbols to claim divine legitimacy, twisting the language of illumination into propaganda. Where the Rosicrucians saw initiation as liberation, dictators saw it as control. The ancient balance between light and shadow, always central to the Brotherhood's teachings, played out on a global stage. Reason turned to machinery, faith to ideology. The great work, once spiritual, had become political. Yet, through each cycle of corruption and renewal, the essential seed endured. The invisible order's true influence was never in governments or revolutions, but in the individual mind. Every philosopher who argued for human dignity, every reformer who sought to replace tyranny with justice, every scientist who pursued truth for its own sake, they all carried forward the same invisible torch. The Rosicrucian revolution was not one of crowns, but of consciousness. Perhaps that is why the Brotherhood could never be destroyed. Empires rose and fell, ideologies came and went, but the dream of a world governed by enlightened reason and compassionate wisdom remained. It resurfaced wherever people believed that knowledge must serve the soul, from the salons of the Enlightenment to the digital think tanks of the present day. And if one listens closely, through the noise of politics and power, one can still hear the faint echo of that ancient manifesto calling across centuries. The world shall awake and see that there is but one truth, one light, and one humanity. The invisible order still works, not through kings or presidents, but through hearts that remember that the true reformation begins within, and from there, changes the world. Legends say that every secret has its geography, that ideas are not only born in minds, but rooted in places. The Rosicrucian mystery is no exception. Though the Brotherhood claimed to be invisible, whispers of its presence cling to certain landscapes like mist to old stone. From the wooded valleys of Germany to the hidden chambers beneath Paris, from the ruined abbeys of England to the secretive temples of southern France, stories persist of sanctuaries where the Rosicrucians once gathered, studied, and performed their mysterious rites. To follow these trails is to walk the border between myth and history, between the known world and the one that hides beneath it. It begins, as so many stories of Western mysticism do, in the heart of the German forests. The Rosicrucian Manifestos, Fama Fraternitatis, Confessio Fraternitatis, and Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, All pointed, in veiled language, toward a region somewhere in central Germany as the cradle of the order. The story of Christian Rosicrucians, the legendary founder, places his tomb in a hidden vault in the interior of the earth, discovered by a new generation of brothers long after his death. For centuries, seekers have tried to locate this vault. Some have suggested it lies near the Harz Mountains, in the labyrinthine caves that honeycomb the region. Others claim it was hidden near Würzburg, where the mystical philosopher Jacob Boehme once wrote of divine revelation through nature. In truth, the vault may never have been a literal place. But in the minds of believers, it became real. A symbol of perfect wisdom buried beneath the corruption of the world, waiting to be unearthed by those pure of heart. Travelers in the 17th and 18th centuries often claimed to encounter Rosicrucian houses of wisdom scattered across Europe. These were not grand cathedrals, but modest villas or manor houses hidden in remote countryside, where men and women of learning gathered to study alchemy, astrology, and the healing arts. One legend tells of a manor near Tübingen, where every room was painted with celestial maps, and where a secret library held volumes of forbidden knowledge written in cipher. Another speaks of a lodge in Prague, the city of Emperor Rudolf II, whose court became a magnet for mystics, alchemists, and heretics. There, under cover of scientific experimentation, adepts pursued the Rosicrucian dream of transforming not only base metals into gold, but ignorance into illumination. Prague itself occupies a unique place in the Rosicrucian imagination, a city of thresholds. Its narrow streets and Gothic towers conceal labyrinthine cellars and secret tunnels, the perfect setting for clandestine initiations. It was here that John Dee, the English mathematician and magician, visited in the late 16th century, seeking to speak with angels through his mysterious scrying crystal. Dee's journals would later influence Rosicrucian thought, blending mathematics, mysticism, and divine revelation into one system of hidden knowledge. Some have even suggested that Dee himself or his associate Edward Kelly may have inspired the myth of Christian Rosicrucians, the wandering scholar who sought the wisdom of the East and brought it back to enlighten Europe. Farther west, the trail of the Brotherhood leads to France, where the 17th century esoteric movement found fertile ground among mystics and alchemists. The Château du Rocher, near Lyon, was rumored to house a secret Rosicrucian temple beneath its foundations. In the libraries of Paris, manuscripts circulated that claimed to reveal the true constitution of the order, describing its initiations and its 7 degrees of enlightenment. Even the catacombs beneath the city, those miles of silent corridors lined with bones, became associated with Rosicrucian ritual. Some late 19th century occultists, like Josephine Pelledin and Stanislas de Guaita, claimed to have revived the Brotherhood's hidden tradition in their Parisian salons, transforming it into a mystical art movement known as the Order of the Rose-Croix Catholique et Esthétique du Temple et du Graal. To them, the Rosicrucian temple was not buried under earth, but hidden in the imagination, a sanctuary of beauty, intellect, and divine love. England, too, holds its share of Rosicrucian traces. The scholars of Oxford and Cambridge, steeped in Hermetic philosophy, were early readers of the Manifestos. It was among them that the first English Rosicrucian circles formed. Rumors circulated of secret chambers beneath old college chapels where strange experiments in light and magnetism were conducted. The Elizabethan age's fascination with hidden knowledge, from the astrology of Dee to the theatrical symbolism of Shakespeare, created fertile soil for Rosicrucian thought to take root. Later, during the 18th century, groups like the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia claimed direct descent from the original fraternity, conducting rituals in candlelit rooms adorned with roses, crosses, and cryptic emblems of the great work. Beyond Europe, the myth traveled still farther. In the 18th and 19th centuries, emigrants and Freemasons carried Rosicrucian symbols to the New World. In Pennsylvania, the enigmatic figure of Johannes Kelpius established a hermit colony along the Wissahickon Creek near Philadelphia, where he and his followers studied astrology, sang hymns to the dawn, and awaited the coming of a new age. They called themselves the Society of the Woman in the Wilderness, drawing imagery from the Book of Revelation, but many later writers identified them as early Rosicrucians. Kelpius's cave, still preserved today, became known as the Rosicrucian Grotto, a place where the invisible college seemed to have found a foothold on American soil. Other places across the world carry similar echoes. A mysterious tower in Newport, Rhode Island, whose architecture resembles medieval observatories. The unfinished Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, carved with symbols that seem to fuse Christianity, alchemy, and pagan wisdom. And the strange stone temples of Portugal's Sintra Mountains, where nobles once practiced secret rites beneath the earth. Whether or not the Rosicrucians truly met in these places hardly matters. Each site reflects the enduring magnetism of their myth, the idea that somewhere, hidden in plain sight, lies a doorway to a higher understanding. As time passed, new generations of seekers mapped the Rosicrucian geography onto a more spiritual landscape. The temple became the human body. The vault of Christian Rosenkreuz became the awakened heart. The hidden places of initiation were no longer physical, but inner realms reached through meditation, prayer, or study. Modern Rosicrucian orders, such as Amorc and the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, reinterpreted the old legends as metaphors for the evolution of consciousness. Yet even they preserved the old reverence for sacred space, their temples carefully designed with geometric precision, oriented toward cosmic harmony, echoing the ancient belief that the universe itself is a cathedral of divine proportion. But one cannot help but wonder, were all these temples merely symbolic? Or did some secret sanctuaries truly exist, repositories of manuscripts, relics, and ancient wisdom? Archaeologists and historians occasionally stumble upon tantalizing clues. A coded inscription in a forgotten chapel, an emblem carved into a lintel, an old map marked with a rose and cross. None of these prove the existence of the brotherhood, but together they suggest that someone or some lineage deliberately wove its symbols into the fabric of the world. Perhaps that was the point. The Rosicrucians may have understood that to preserve wisdom, one must hide it in plain sight. The cathedrals, the chapels, the meadows, and the mountains all became pages of a vast, encrypted book, waiting for those with eyes to read it. Every compass rose carved into stone, every alchemical symbol etched into glass, every geometric pattern laid into the floor of a church whispered the same message. The world itself is the temple. And so, the true geography of the Rosicrucians may not be found on any map. It lies in the imagination of humankind, in the way a place, a symbol, or a melody can awaken something ancient within us. Whether one stands in a dim crypt in Germany, a ruined abbey in France, or a quiet forest in America, the feeling is the same. A sense of presence, of unseen watchfulness, as though the air itself remembers. It is the echo of the Brotherhood's vow, that their work would endure across centuries, across continents, hidden among us, waiting for the next seeker to recognize the signs and continue the great work. Every great mystery hides behind symbols, and in the case of the Rosicrucians, their language of signs is as intricate and haunting as the legends themselves. The rose and the cross, two ancient emblems, fused into a single icon that has captivated scholars, mystics, and dreamers for centuries. To some, it is a simple Christian motif. To others, it is a cipher, a map of the soul, or a key to the hidden architecture of the universe. The Rosicrucians never explained its meaning outright. Instead, they left it scattered in manuscripts, alchemical illustrations, and enigmatic emblems. A puzzle that invites the seeker to think not only with the intellect, but with the spirit. The rose, first of all, is one of the oldest mystical flowers in human tradition. In ancient Greece, it was sacred to Aphrodite, symbolizing love and rebirth. In medieval alchemy, it represented the unfolding of perfection, the soul blooming through the trials of transformation. Its petals, arranged in spirals of mathematical precision, mirror the geometry of creation itself. The cross, on the other hand, long predates Christianity. It appeared in ancient Egypt as the ankh, the symbol of life. In the East, as the intersection of heaven and earth. When the two are joined, the rose upon the cross, they signify the union of opposites. Spirit and matter, love and sacrifice, beauty and suffering, divine wisdom rooted in the mortal world. In the Rosicrucian context, this union becomes a map of initiation. The cross is the body, the realm of earthly experience. The rose is the heart, where divine knowledge blossoms through pain and transformation. Together, they form the symbol of the perfected human being, one who has reconciled the material and the spiritual, who has found enlightenment through the crucible of life itself. It is both a promise and a warning. Illumination demands surrender. Beauty is born from sacrifice. This duality lies at the very core of Rosicrucian thought. But the Rosicrucians' genius was not merely in adopting symbols. It was in creating a language of layers, where every emblem concealed multiple meanings. The rose, for instance, could also represent secrecy. The Latin phrase sub rosa, under the rose, meant that something was spoken in confidence. In medieval churches, roses were carved into confessionals to remind the faithful that their words would remain hidden. For the Rosicrucians, whose very existence depended on discretion, the rose became the perfect sign of silence. Their teachings, like the petals of a flower, concealed the heart within many folds. The cross, too, carried esoteric dimensions. Alchemically, its four arms represented the elements: earth, air, fire, and water, balanced around a central point, the quintessence or spirit. To bear the cross, in the alchemist's sense, was to harmonize these forces within oneself, to achieve the philosopher's stone not in the laboratory, but in the soul. This idea of the inner alchemy, transforming ignorance into wisdom, fear into love, became the cornerstone of Rosicrucian practice. The crucifixion, then, was not only a historical event but a symbol of personal transmutation. The death of the lower self, giving birth to the divine within. Beyond these primary emblems, the Rosicrucians employed a complex network of symbols drawn from multiple traditions. The 7 stars, for example, symbolized the 7 classical planets, each governing a stage of spiritual ascent. The serpent biting its tail, the Ouroboros, represented the eternal cycle of life and death, the continuity of the great work. The pelican feeding its young with its own blood, a common Rosicrucian motif, depicted the soul nourishing humanity through self-sacrifice. Even colors had significance. Red for transformation, gold for illumination, black for the death of ignorance. The chimical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, the most enigmatic of the Rosicrucian texts, is itself a masterpiece of symbolic storytelling. Every event, from the invitation sealed with mysterious characters to the alchemical wedding in the castle, is an allegory. The 7 days of the narrative correspond to stages of spiritual purification, mirroring both the alchemical process and the journey of the soul through the planetary spheres. The marriage at its climax symbolizes the union of opposites: sun and moon, king and queen, intellect and intuition, the reconciliation that leads to the birth of the philosophical child, the enlightened self. Even the character of Christian Rosenkreuz is symbolic. His name, Christian of the Rosy Cross, may not refer to an actual person, but to a state of being. Some scholars suggest that Christian here signifies one who follows the path of the Christos, the inner divine principle, rather than the institutional church. Rosenkreuz, the rose and cross combined, signifies one who has achieved the balance of spiritual love and material mastery. In this interpretation, the founder of the brotherhood is not an individual at all, but the archetype of enlightenment, the inner teacher that awakens in every sincere seeker. The Rosicrucian use of symbols was not meant to obscure truth, but to protect it. In an age when heresy could lead to execution, allegory was a language of survival. But there was also a deeper reason. The brotherhood believed that true wisdom could never be communicated directly. It had to be discovered through experience. A symbol is like a seed, meaningless unless planted in the soil of the mind. Only through contemplation does it unfold its hidden essence. Thus, their writings were designed as initiatory texts, puzzles that tested the reader's patience, humility, and insight. Those who sought mere curiosity found confusion. Those who sought transformation found revelation. This layered symbolism also reflected the Rosicrucian conviction that the universe itself was written in code. Nature, they believed, is a divine book. Every leaf, every star, every atom inscribed with meaning. The task of the philosopher was to learn its language, to read the handwriting of God in the geometry of creation. This belief linked them to the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. The same patterns that govern the stars govern the soul. The same proportions that shape the flower shape the human heart. To understand one is to understand the other. The Rosicrucian symbols later seeped into art, architecture, and even music. Cathedrals incorporated rose windows not only as decoration but as cosmic diagrams. The wheel of time, the unfolding of divine order. Composers like Bach and Mozart, themselves steeped in Masonic and mystical lore, encoded numerological patterns in their music that mirrored Rosicrucian structures. Sequences of 7, 12, and 40, numbers representing transformation, completion, and initiation. Even in literature, from Goethe's Faust to Yeats's Golden Dawn writings, the rose and the cross reappear as emblems of humanity's eternal quest to unite the earthly and the divine. In the modern age, symbols have become diluted by repetition, their meanings blurred by overuse. Yet the Rosicrucian emblems retain their power because they speak to something timeless within us. The rose and the cross are not relics of a forgotten brotherhood, but mirrors of the human journey. The rose blooms in secret, unfolding layer by layer, just as understanding does. The cross reminds us that growth comes through struggle, that enlightenment requires endurance. Together, they express a truth older than any creed, that the path to divinity passes through humanity, and that every life, however ordinary, can become a temple of transformation. Perhaps that is the final secret encoded in the Rosicrucian language, that their symbols are not keys to some external mystery, but reflections of our own inner architecture. To decipher them is to remember what we already are, fragments of light striving toward wholeness. The rose is our heart, the cross is our life, and the great work, still unfolding after centuries, is the awakening of both. In the shadowed laboratories of Europe's past, there was a peculiar glow, the dim, flickering light of alchemical furnaces, where men in robes and scholars in secrecy worked through the night, surrounded by flasks, retorts, and manuscripts filled with cryptic sigils. These were not merely scientists nor simple mystics. They were seekers, driven by a vision that transcended both religion and reason. The Rosicrucians, according to legend, were among the most skilled and secretive of them all. They were said to hold the lost knowledge of Egypt, the hidden mathematics of Pythagoras, and the divine science of Hermes Trismegistus. To the world, they appeared as rumor. To those who claimed to know them, they were the guardians of the forbidden art, the science of transmutation, not of metals alone, but of the human soul itself. In the early 17th century, alchemy was more than chemistry. It was a spiritual quest. The Rosicrucians understood this deeply. They taught that every process in nature, the burning of fire, the distillation of water, the fusion of metals, mirrored an inner transformation. The alchemist's laboratory was not a workshop of greed, but a temple of meditation. The furnace represented the trials of life, the crucible, the human heart, and the transformation of lead into gold symbolized the purification of the soul through suffering and enlightenment. Yet beneath this poetic symbolism, the Rosicrucians also practiced real science, experimenting with herbal medicine, optics, magnetism, and early chemistry. They sought not to defy nature, but to understand its divine order, the secret architecture that links spirit to substance. Among the countless rumors surrounding the brotherhood, few are as persistent as their alleged mastery of the elixir vitae, the elixir of life. Many accounts describe Rosicrucian adepts who appeared ageless, who healed the sick with a touch, who disappeared without trace when pursued. The mysterious Count of Saint Germain, who dazzled 18th-century Europe with his apparent immortality and boundless knowledge, was often said to be one of them. He spoke fluently in languages no one had heard him study, produced gems and gold from nowhere, and hinted that he had known Christ personally. Some dismissed him as a charlatan, but others whispered that he was a true initiate of the Rosy Cross, a living embodiment of their alchemical success, the man who had transmuted death into life. But immortality, for the Rosicrucians, did not mean endless existence of the body. It meant awakening the immortal consciousness within, that spark of divinity which never dies. Their elixir was symbolic as much as it was chemical, a state of perfect harmony between the elements of the body and the spirit, achieved through knowledge, discipline, and love. Still, they believed that such inner balance could have outer effects, prolonging life, sharpening the mind, healing the body. Their manuscripts speak of living waters, philosophical mercury, and the dew of heaven, substances that may have referred as much to spiritual principles as to physical compounds. The Rosicrucian laboratories were not entirely mythic. In the wake of their manifestos, real societies of natural philosophers appeared, blending science and mysticism in the search for universal laws. Figures like Paracelsus, Robert Fludd, and Michael Meyer were often linked to Rosicrucianism, though whether they were true initiates remains unknown. Paracelsus had already revolutionized medicine by rejecting superstition and proposing that disease arose from natural causes, curable through precise remedies, a philosophy very much aligned with Rosicrucian ideals. Robert Fludd, an English physician and mystic, wrote elaborate volumes uniting cosmology, music, and mathematics, describing the human being as a microcosm reflecting the divine macrocosm. His engravings, suns within circles, ladders of light, and human figures infused with celestial energy, remain some of the most beautiful visualizations of Rosicrucian cosmology. Fludd's contemporary, Michael Meyer, published treatises that blurred the line between chemistry and theology. His Atlantifusions, a work of 50 emblems accompanied by fugues and epigrams, was a Rosicrucian symphony of alchemical wisdom, meant to teach through image, sound, and poetry. Each emblem depicted a stage of transformation: death, dissolution, purification, resurrection. It was a guide to the great work, designed not merely for reading but for contemplation, a meditation manual disguised as science. Meyer insisted that true alchemy could not be separated from divine revelation. He who would transmute metals, he wrote, must first transmute himself. Still, the Rosicrucians were not immune to controversy. The boundary between sacred knowledge and forbidden knowledge was thin. Church authorities viewed alchemy with suspicion, fearing that its practitioners sought to usurp divine power. The idea of creating gold, or worse, of creating life, was seen as blasphemy. The Rosicrucians' secrecy only deepened the paranoia. Were they in league with demons, as some priests claimed? Or were they uncovering truths too dangerous for the world to see? Their writings hint at a deliberate concealment. The Fama Fraternitatis describes the brotherhood as possessing a vast collection of books and instruments to which all arts are subordinate, hidden in the vault of their founder. They vowed to reveal themselves only when humanity was ready. Until then, they would continue their experiments unseen, working for the glory of God and the relief of man's estate. To them, science and faith were never opposed. They were two aspects of the same divine curiosity. But in a world dominated by dogma, that idea was revolutionary, even heretical. The Rosicrucians' interest in the forbidden sciences extended beyond alchemy. They studied astrology, not as fortune-telling, but as a language of cosmic correspondence, the belief that the stars reflect inner states of consciousness. They investigated magnetism, fascinated by invisible forces acting at a distance, long before Newton or Faraday. They experimented with light, believing it to be the purest manifestation of divine energy. Some early Rosicrucian texts describe luminous vapors and rays that heal and transform, foreshadowing later discoveries in optics and radiation. Whether they possessed true technological foresight or used metaphorical language for spiritual illumination, the effect was the same. They inspired generations to see the natural world as alive with meaning and mystery. Their secrecy, however, invited imitation. Many later groups claimed Rosicrucian lineage to lend authority to their own pursuits, from the alchemists of the Enlightenment to the occult revivalists of the 19th century. Some practiced genuine study, others sought fame or fortune. Yet all inherited the same paradox, the desire to make the hidden visible without betraying its sanctity. For the true Rosicrucian, knowledge was sacred fire. It could enlighten or destroy, depending on the heart of the one who wielded it. The deeper truth of the Rosicrucian experiments lies not in the creation of gold or the promise of immortality, but in the transformation of perception. They believed that by refining one's inner nature, the outer world would respond in kind. To purify lead was to purify desire. To distill mercury was to clarify thought. To ignite sulfur was to awaken divine will. The laboratory was both physical and spiritual, the place where the world's hidden harmony could be revealed through disciplined devotion. When one studies their legacy today, in the manuscripts of Meyer, in Flood's cosmic diagrams, in the cryptic emblems that survived book burnings and inquisitions, one sees the beginnings of modern science intertwined with mystical wonder. The Rosicrucians bridged two worlds, the age of miracles and the age of reason. In their hands, the crucible and the chalice became the same vessel, a container for the mystery of creation itself. Perhaps their greatest experiment was not with chemicals, but with humanity. They sought to prove that enlightenment could coexist with empirical truth, that the quest for divine wisdom could lead to the healing of both body and soul. And though centuries have passed, their alchemical dream remains alive in every act of discovery, every scientific miracle born from wonder rather than ambition. For in the end, as the Rosicrucians taught, the greatest transformation is not of metal into gold, but of ignorance into understanding. And the true philosopher's stone lies hidden, not in stone or flame, but in the awakened heart of man. As the centuries turned, the serene glow of Rosicrucian wisdom began to cast darker shadows. What had once been a philosophy of enlightenment slowly became a breeding ground for imitation, distortion, and fear. By the 18th century, Europe was obsessed with secret orders. Everywhere, men claimed initiation into hidden brotherhoods, some genuine seekers, others opportunists feeding on the myth of the Rosy Cross. Governments and churches alike began to whisper of a vast conspiracy, a network of invisible masters guiding revolutions, manipulating kings, and guarding secrets too powerful for the public eye. The Rosicrucians, it was said, had merged with the Freemasons, or perhaps ruled them from behind the veil. In taverns and royal courts, rumors spread that their symbol, the rose upon the cross, concealed a plan to reshape the world itself. Yet no proof ever surfaced. Letters vanished, alleged members disappeared, and the line between truth and myth dissolved completely. The order that had once promised divine illumination now found itself reborn as a phantom, a presence both revered and feared. Perhaps this was their intention all along, to teach through mystery, to hide wisdom in shadow, so only those with pure sight would ever find the light. By the late 19th century, the echoes of Rosicrucian wisdom had diffused into a labyrinth of secret societies that shaped the modern occult revival. In London, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn emerged, drawing heavily from Rosicrucian symbolism. The rose and cross became not just emblems of enlightenment, but of spiritual hierarchy. Freemasonry, too, absorbed Rosicrucian myth into its higher degrees, turning moral allegory into mystical philosophy. These groups attracted poets, scientists, and seekers alike, men and women who longed for meaning in an age of machines and reason. Yet beneath their candlelit lodges and whispered rituals, the same question lingered. Were they preserving the light of an ancient brotherhood, or merely playing at its shadow? The ideals of transformation, unity, and divine harmony still pulsed through their teachings, but now they mixed with ambition, nationalism, and the hunger for secret power. What began as a spiritual revolution of the soul was evolving into a map of influence, a web of hidden lineages claiming descent from an invisible past. And within that tangled web, the Rosy Cross endured, no longer a secret order, but a timeless symbol of humanity's search for the truth behind the veil. Across the centuries, the Rosicrucians learned that symbols could guard truth better than walls. Their emblems appeared everywhere, in paintings, cathedrals, and manuscripts, disguised as decoration yet pulsing with hidden meaning. The rose and cross, when joined, represented the union of divine spirit and human flesh, the blooming of enlightenment from the crucifix of suffering. In art, they hid their codes within geometry. A petal count aligned to planetary numbers, a beam of light arranged to strike at equinox, a word capitalized where none should be. Even Shakespeare's works, Bacon's essays, and early engravings by Dürer and Flood have been read as veiled Rosicrucian manuscripts. To the untrained eye, they were only beauty. To the initiate, they were maps of transformation. Cathedrals like Chartres and Rosslyn, with their labyrinths, sacred ratios, and stained glass mandalas, mirrored the Rosicrucian view of the universe. that the divine blueprint is hidden in all creation. The secret was not to find the symbols but to see through them. For every rose carved in stone, every spiral drawn in gold, whispered the same promise. The mysteries were never lost. They were only hidden in plain sight, awaiting the eyes that had been prepared to recognize them. To understand the true essence of the Rosicrucian tradition, one must go beyond the symbols and the secrecy, into the heart of their philosophy, which was nothing less than a vision of divine unity. The Rosicrucians believed that all of creation was one vast living organism, animated by the same spirit that breathes through every star and every human soul. They saw no separation between science and faith, reason and revelation, or man and God. In their eyes, the universe was the body of the divine, and every act of discovery, whether in alchemy, mathematics, or love, was an act of communion with that infinite intelligence. They taught that humanity was on a journey of awakening, a long evolution from ignorance to illumination. Each person, they said, carried within them the seed of divine consciousness, a spark of the eternal fire that had only to be kindled through knowledge, virtue, and compassion. The true alchemy was not about turning lead into gold, but the transformation of the soul, from base desires and fear into wisdom and light. This was the great work, the secret labor of the Rosicrucian adept, to perfect the inner self, so that the outer world might also be renewed. They saw the world's suffering, wars, and corruption not as signs of doom, but as stages in a cosmic process of purification. Just as the alchemist's furnace burns away impurities to reveal the pure essence beneath, so too must humanity endure trials to awaken to its higher nature. Their philosophy was one of hope, that beneath all chaos lies divine order, and beneath every ending, a new beginning waiting to unfold. For the Rosicrucians, history itself was the unfolding of a hidden plan, the slow revelation of the divine within the human. As the centuries turned, the Rosicrucian ideal continued to ripple quietly through history, shaping minds that sought harmony between science and spirit. During the Enlightenment, when reason began to eclipse faith, the Rosicrucian current offered a bridge, a reminder that knowledge without wisdom was hollow, that discovery without reverence for the sacred was blindness in disguise. Many philosophers, inventors, and artists drew unknowingly from their teachings. The belief that truth could be found by observing nature, decoding its patterns, and aligning the human mind with cosmic law, this was pure Rosicrucianism in disguise, reframed as modern science. But as their ideas spread, their mystery deepened. Secret societies emerged claiming descent from the original brethren: Freemasons, Martinists, Theosophists, and later, occult orders of the 19th century. Each adapted fragments of the Rosicrucian inheritance, symbols, rituals, philosophies, weaving them into their own frameworks. To some, this diffusion was corruption. To others, it was fulfillment, the invisible brotherhood finally seeding the world with the wisdom it once guarded so carefully. By the time of the Romantic era, the Rosicrucian had become a mythic figure, the eternal seeker, cloaked in mystery, pursuing hidden truth in defiance of dogma and tyranny. Even today, the name persists. Modern Rosicrucian organizations claim lineage to that ancient order, continuing its studies in metaphysics, spirituality, and natural law. Whether these groups preserve the true essence of the original brotherhood or merely echo its legend is a question history cannot answer. Yet, the endurance of their name across 4 centuries testifies to something enduring: a hunger in the human soul for hidden wisdom, for a faith that embraces both stars and spirit, science and soul. The Rosicrucians may have vanished from the world stage, but their philosophy never died. It transformed, as all living truths do, into new forms awaiting rediscovery. And so, we arrive at the final veil, the enduring question that has haunted seekers for centuries. Who were the Rosicrucians, truly? Were they an organized brotherhood that once moved unseen through the courts of Europe, guiding history from the shadows? Or were they a myth, a parable born from the restless dreams of an age yearning for enlightenment? Perhaps they were both. The documents that survive, the manifestos and the legends, suggest a design too intricate to dismiss as fiction. Yet the silence that followed their supposed appearance feels deliberate, as though their disappearance was the final step in their initiation, to dissolve their identities and become what they had always spoken of, invisible. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that the Rosicrucians were not meant to be found but understood. They were an idea wearing human form, a call to transformation disguised as a secret society. Their message was never about power or control. It was about awakening, to open the eyes of humanity to the divine pattern behind existence, to remind us that within every soul lies a hidden chamber of light, waiting to be unveiled. That was their true initiation, and it remains ours still. Even now, in a world driven by noise and reason, their whisper endures. It speaks through art, through science, through every human act of creation and compassion. The Rosicrucians may have vanished, but their purpose never did. To unite what was divided, to bring light where there was darkness, and to prove that knowledge and faith are not enemies but twin wings of the same eternal flight. Perhaps that is their greatest secret, that the brotherhood was never lost, only waiting for those ready to remember who they truly are. The Rosicrucian mystery does not end with history. It lives within the human longing for something more, for hidden order amid chaos, for meaning beneath the weight of existence. Perhaps this is why the story still resonates today. We live in an age overflowing with knowledge but starved of wisdom, surrounded by information yet cut off from understanding. In many ways, the world has become what the Rosicrucians feared, a civilization that sees only the surface of things, forgetting the divine geometry that shapes them. Their teachings whisper to us from across the centuries, urging us to look deeper, to remember that truth is not found by dissecting the world, but by awakening to its harmony. To walk the Rosicrucian path now is not to seek membership in a hidden order or to memorize ancient symbols. It is to live with awareness, to see the divine pattern in the mundane, the sacred pulse in the ordinary. It is to heal the ancient divide between science and spirit, logic and love, and to rediscover the world as a reflection of the infinite. The great work they spoke of continues not in secret temples but within the hearts of those who seek understanding over dominance, creation over destruction, harmony over pride. Maybe that is the true legacy of the Rosicrucians. Not a secret guarded in shadows, but a light passed silently from one soul to another. A reminder that enlightenment is not a distant prize but a state of perception, a way of seeing the world as whole again. And in that moment of recognition, when the veil lifts and the rose blooms within the cross of our own lives, we too become part of the hidden brotherhood, not of secrecy, but of awakening.